Chapter 507. To the three tribes, the Yanjiao tribe's answer could be summed up in one sentence. It's none of your business. The Yanjiao tribe's fire seed was abnormal? That's Yanjiao's business. What does it have to do with you? Will they attack the Wanshe tribe? That's Yanjiao's business. What does it have to do with you? It had to be said that the three tribes felt a headache in the face of Yanjiao's attitude. They felt powerless and didn't know where to start. The Yanjiao people didn't even look at gold weapons. Fire seed? They all kept their mouths shut. Conflict with the Wanshe tribe? The Yanjiao tribe had no intention of asking for help. Huang Yi and the other two could only inform their respective tribes of this troublesome news. Then they carefully considered whether they could find a better way to pry open the Yanjiao people's mouths. While these people were thinking about how to pry open the stubborn Yanjiao people's mouths, the Yanjiao tribe was also having a discussion. Now everyone has adapted well, said Ao. After the fusion of the fire seed, it was indeed more powerful. Everyone was much more excited. The previous restlessness had obviously faded a lot. And the warriors looked forward to showing off their skills. When Zhang Luo and the others returned to the old haunt, they saw the Wanshe people. They knew that if they had come half a day later, the result might have been different. The tribe's fire seed might not have been destroyed, but many people would have been sacrificed. They couldn't ignore this matter just because they didn't fight. Moreover, the Wanshe people had destroyed the old haunt in Yanjiao. Many warriors still remembered how excited they were when they first arrived. But when they saw the mess on the ground, the remains of the stone pillars that had obviously been destroyed not long ago, and the fire pit had been dug into a messy pit. What kind of place was the fire pit? It was the most sacred place for the entire tribe. For the tribesmen, destroying the fire pit was a blood feud. It was a provocation and a declaration of war. If the chief hadn't stopped them, they would have already rushed out to fight. After so long, they still remembered this grudge. But back then, Yanjiao hadn't stabilized and they didn't know much about this new world. So the chief stopped them from acting rashly. But now the time was ripe. Yanjiao was complete. It was time to settle the score. They had adapted to the fusion of the fire seed and were preparing their weapons. Metal, bone, horn and so on. It was time to fight. But they still had to prepare before the battle. The elderly, children, and women who hadn't awakened totemic power had to retreat into the forest first. They had to stay in a safe place to prevent someone's lives of their own. He also had to send someone to keep an eye on the Wanderer area to prevent spies from appearing among the Wanderers. He also had to keep an eye out to prevent rumors from spreading. As for what to do with the slave masters of the Yanjiao, the giant clawed bear is with the bone beast. What will you do? Xiao Xian asked Duo Kong. Of course we'll do it together. Duo Kong didn't think much of it and made a chopping gesture. But when he turned around, he saw the others staring at him. They weren't happy with his idea. What if you don't bring many people and it's hard to deal with these two beasts? Xiao Xian asked again. The Yanjiao was not only huge, but also had thick skin. It was fierce and aggressive. It was one of the most ferocious species of the Yanjiao. And the Yanjiao was even harder to deal with than the Yanjiao. Duo Kang's mind spun quickly. He slapped his leg. No. We should lure the Yanjiao away and focus on the Yanjiao. Then we'll find a chance to track the Yanjiao and set up a trap. Then we'll ambush it. When Xiao Xian first arrived at the tribe on the other side of the sea, he had used a trap to catch a bone beast. Many people's jaws dropped. Duo Kong remembered it vividly. When he saw Xiao Xian and the rest dragging a bone beast, he was equally shocked. He asked Duo Li about the details of the incident and still remembered it. Although Xiao Xian's metaphor was different from the current situation, it was enough to let Duo Kong know their plans. When Xiao Xian and Zhang Luo returned to the old haunt, they met the Wanshe people and slave masters outside the fearsome beast forest. They knew then that the Wanshe people and slave masters were not harmonious. There were conflicts everywhere. The Yanjiao tribe was not afraid of the Wanshe and slave masters who escaped the desert. But if they could reduce their casualties, why not? Why fight head-on? They didn't want to work with other tribes, but that didn't mean they were reckless. And so, on a cloudy afternoon, when the sun was blocked by a large cloud, a blood-stained spear flew out of the fearsome beast forest. Like a bright flash of lightning, it flew high into the sky, leaving a crimson trail in the air as it flew towards the Wanshe tribe. Bang! The spear stabbed into the ground not far from the Wanshe tribe's outer wall. A third of the spear was embedded in the ground. All of a sudden, The guards outside the Wanshe tribe were startled. A few days ago, there had been strange movements in the ferocious beast's mountain forest, which made the people of the Wanshe tribe panic. However, the chief didn't allow them to talk about it in private. If they met someone, they would beat him directly. Therefore, even if they were curious about what had happened in the ferocious beast's mountain forest, they could only keep it in their hearts. But this kind of thing couldn't be suppressed for too long. Instead, it had the opposite effect. As a result, the guards were always absent-minded. In order to divert everyone's attention, the chief planned to send another team to rob a small tribe. Then they could bring back a few more women. Perhaps everyone's attention would be diverted from the fearsome beast forest. Therefore, when the long spear flew over, the guards were thinking about robbing women and valuables. They didn't notice the sudden long spear in the sky. When the long spear approached them, they suddenly felt that their scalps were covered with ice while the fine hairs on the back of their necks were quivering. It was a reaction brought by intuition. When they heard the sound of the spear hitting the ground was still a few steps away from them, they felt relieved. They looked carefully and found it was a spear. If it was just an ordinary spear, it would be fine. But this spear was different. The spear was covered with a layer of beast blood. When they approached it, they could smell the obvious smell of blood. The blood on the spear was not completely dry. When they touched it, they would get some blood on their hands. There was a circle of animal skin tied near the end of the spear. The guard carefully walked over and untied the animal skin roll. When he opened it, he still smelled the strong smell of blood. But it was not like the spear was smeared with beast blood. Instead, there were words written on the animal skin roll with blood. After reading what was written on it, the god hurriedly handed it over. Not long after, the chief of the Wanshe tribe, Xueqi, strode out of the tribe. His face was so gloomy as if a storm was brewing. The blood-stained spear was still lying there. Xueqi walked over and grabbed the spear to pull it out. It didn't take much effort to pull out the spear from the ground. However, he quickly discovered that the stone spearhead of the spear was gone. When he asked someone to dig out the spearhead, he discovered that the entire spearhead had been shattered and separated from the body of the spear. Just how much force was used to make the stone spearhead become like this? Xueqi suddenly felt that the wooden spear in his hand had become much heavier. What did the Yanjiao mean by this? A demonstration? A declaration of war? Thinking about the words on the animal skin roll, Xueqi thought that the Yanjiao people were declaring war. The slave masters soon learned about what happened in front of the Wanshe tribe. After noticing the strange movements in the fearsome beast forest, the Wanshe tribe had strengthened their guards. They were ready for any attacks and guarding against the Yanjiao people. The slave masters didn't plan to rely on the Wanshe people for information. They trusted themselves more and sent people to keep an eye on the situation. So soon after the spear fell to the ground, they learned about it. Before Bai Mo could destroy the animal skin scroll, several slave owners brought their own slaves and came to ask Bai Mo about the animal skin scroll. He knew that the more he tried to hide it, the more suspicious the slave masters would be. Therefore, after the slave masters had mentioned it several times, Fu Wu changed his mind at the last minute and took out the animal skin scroll instead of destroying it. These words were written by the flaming horns. The blood used is also human blood, said Fu Ji as he looked at the slave master holding the scroll. His brows were tightly furrowed. After killing enough, they could tell the difference between animal blood and human blood. The blood on the spear was animal blood, but the words on the animal skin roll were definitely human blood. The Yanjiao declared war on us. We have to prepare for battle, Xueqi said. The person holding the animal skin roll did not comment on Baian's words. He rolled up the animal skin roll and left with it without giving it back to Baian. Xueqi's expression darkened as he watched the slave masters and slaves leave. The slave masters who left sneered inwardly. The Yanjiao people wrote on the animal skin roll that they hated the Wanshe people. It was obviously against the Wanshe people. What did it have to do with the slave masters? But if the Wanshe people were unlucky, where would the slave masters go? It was rare for them to find a decent place. It would be a pity to give it up. But the Wanshe people were becoming more and more disobedient. They had almost forgotten who helped them rise up. Perhaps they should foster a new tribe? He couldn't tell, so he took the animal skin roll to discuss with the others. At the edge of fearsome beast forest, Duo Kong stretched his arms and looked proudly at Ta and Gigu. How was it? I threw the spear well, didn't I? Tower ignored him. Guei waved his hand and said, I can do that too. However, The real competition will have to wait until the start of the war. All three of them were candidates for chief. This battle with the Wanshur people was their chance to prove themselves. Ta looked away from the Wanshur tribe and turned to Xiao Xian. What if the slave masters don't leave? What should we do? Then we'll deal with them all, Xiao Xian said. Chapter 508. Xiao Xian and the others just wanted to test the slave masters hiding in the Wanshur tribe. If there were conflicts between the slave masters or disagreements with the Wanshur tribe, it would be a good thing for Yanjiao. As long as they didn't band together, it would be beneficial for Yanjiao. Now there were more than one slave master in the Wanshur tribe. According to the information they gathered, besides the slave masters in White Stone, who had the closest relationship with the Wanshur tribe, there were more or less slave masters in the other cities. With such a group of people mixed together, and thinking about the temperament of the slave owners, it would be difficult to get them to unite. The Wanshur tribe's chief must be very troubled now, said Duo Kong. No matter what they do, no matter how they react in the end, we have to fight this war, said Ta, staring fiercely in the direction of the Wanshur tribe. That's right, just like Xian said, we can just plan together, said Gigu. Gigu was about to ask Xiao Xian some more questions when he saw Xiao Xian staring in one direction. He didn't say anything and just observed what was there. Duo Kong and Ta didn't say anything when they saw this. With their abilities, they could naturally sense that there was something approaching them from the bushes in the forest. However, judging from the movements in the bushes and what they felt, the approaching thing wasn't a threat, so they didn't pay much attention to it. In the forest on the left, there was a rustling sound in the bushes. The sound was getting closer and closer, and they could clearly see the grass shaking. Through the dense bushes, although they could only see a little bit of beast fur through the narrow gaps between the bushes, they knew what it was. It was a wild rat often seen in the forest. It was small, fast and agile, but because it was too small, it wasn't a fearsome beast, and it didn't have much meat. For creatures like this that lived at the bottom of the food chain, unless life was really difficult, they would usually set traps around the fields to prevent them from damaging the crops. Usually, tribesmen wouldn't bother with rats like this, especially after they came to the old haunt. Their lives were much better, and now they just ignored rats when they saw them. The forest was so big, and there were so many rats like this. Duo Kong and the others didn't care about this seemingly ordinary rat. Just as they were about to look away, they saw Xiao Xian quickly pull out a spear dart from the animal belt tied around his waist. Without any hesitation, he threw his arm. The stone spear dart was like a cold gray light, shooting towards that direction with murderous intent. Puff! The sound of a sharp weapon piercing through flesh and nailing to the ground could be heard from the bushes. Following that, a trace of blood qi diffused out. Xiao Xian walked over and picked up a brown rat that was smaller than a fist from the bushes. This rat was still alive. Xiao Xian held the spear dart's handle and looked at the rat that was still struggling. A fierce red light flashed in the rat's wide eyes, then dimmed as if covered by a layer of haze. The rat's struggling body stopped moving. What? Are you interested in this little thing? Duo Kong smiled. It's not delicious. However, when he saw Xiao Xian frown as he stared at the dead rat, Duo Kang's smile disappeared. What's wrong? Ta and Gigu also knew that Xiao Xian wouldn't be so bored as to hunt a rat that could be found everywhere in the forest, so they quickly walked up and looked at the rat carefully. They didn't find anything strange. I feel like its aura is familiar, said Xiao Xian. He had never seen this wild rat before, but for a moment, he suddenly had a feeling that he was being watched. That was not something an ordinary wild rat could have. You've seen it before? Asked Duo Kong. He wasn't as face-blind as Guang Yi, but when it came to rats that were often seen, he felt like they all looked the same. How did Xiao Xian recognize it? Could it be that he could smell like a wild animal? Xiao Xian shook his head. I haven't seen it before, but the feeling it gives me is very similar to the sand ants I saw in the desert in the Beast City. When Xiao Xian mentioned Beast City, the three team leaders immediately became serious. Slave Master? Asked Gigu. They were wary of the slave masters, especially after hearing about the completely different situation on the other side of the sea. The slave masters were far more powerful than they thought. Although the tribesmen didn't have any good feelings towards the slave masters because of those people in the desert, they had to admit that the slave masters' strength naturally had their own reasons. Some things were really admirable. Therefore, there was no room for carelessness when it came to the slave masters, even more so than the Wanshur tribe. It could be the slave masters who escaped from the desert, or it could be the Wanshur people. Xiao Xian told them about what he encountered in Beast City. At that time, when he, Lei and Tuo followed the people of Luoya City to Beast City, they once saw a few sand ants in a room. At that time, several sand ants were dismembered by Sapphire and wrapped in dung balls. Xiao Xian didn't study it carefully, he just thought it was strange why there were sand ants there. Later, he couldn't find the reason and just let it go. However now, here, Xiao Xian found a feeling similar to the sand ants. There was something wrong with this wild rat. Recently, everyone should be on guard, Xiao Xian said after thinking about it. Let the tribes be busy. Xiao Xian didn't know how many such wild rats there were, nor did he know if there were other beasts besides these wild rats. At such a critical time, it was always good to be on guard. If people couldn't feel the strangeness of those beasts, then let the beasts do it. The 3 team leaders nodded again and again. They didn't think of this because they hadn't encountered it before, so they didn't know there was such a method. If Xiao Xian hadn't reminded them, maybe the Wanxue tribe would have known about it. When the wild rat was nailed to death by Xiao Xian, the Wanxue tribe, in a large stone house near the center of the tribe, a man sitting cross-legged on a piece of animal skin spat out a mouthful of blood. The blood dripped from his mouth onto the bone ornament around his neck that was carved into various skulls. At this moment, his face was pale and his muscles twitched. His eyes were fierce and filled with undisguised anger. His twisted face looked even more ferocious. How is it? The chief of the Wanxue tribe, Feng Wu, asked hurriedly. One was nailed to death. The young Wanxue shaman breathed heavily. This feeling of being out of control was very unpleasant. He recalled what happened in the desert. He still remembered that time. In order to curry favor with the young lord of Whitestone City, he took out the sand ants that he had painstakingly raised and guided them to do something. But he did not expect that not a single one of those sand ants could come back. In the end, not only did they fail to satisfy the young master of the Baisha tribe, but they also suffered great losses. He hadn't completely swallowed his anger, and now it happened again. Before he lost all connection with the sand ants, he had seen a ball of fire, but it was blurry. There seemed to be a horn in the fire, but he didn't know what it was. Later, he had various guesses, but he couldn't be sure. Now, he finally knew what that ball of fire represented. It was a yen jiao. This time, before he lost connection with the wild rat, he saw the ball of fire again. It was very clear and very large, much larger and clearer than the one the sand ants saw last time. He saw something that looked like 2 horns in the fire. That was the yen jiao totem. And the person who nailed the wild rat he sent out was a yen jiao. It was always a yen jiao. The yen jiao were simply evil. The chief of the Wanxue tribe, Feng Wu, heard the result and cursed angrily. Of course, he wasn't cursing the Wanxue shaman, he was cursing the yen jiao. But while he was cursing the yen jiao, he was also cursing the Wanxue shaman as trash in his mind. 2 years ago, when the young shaman came back from the desert, he was extremely arrogant. He always thought that he was so arrogant that he didn't even take the leader seriously. Later, when the incident happened in the desert, he was under Feng Wu's control, so he became more obedient. While the Wanxue shaman was panting and Feng Wu was cursing, the others in the room lowered their heads and didn't say a word. They were usually fierce to their subordinates, but now they were like children who had made a mistake. They stood there, afraid of being noticed by Feng Wu. When Feng Wu finished cursing, the others raised their heads slightly to discuss the upcoming war with the Yanjiao tribes. Everyone present was at least a small leader in the Wanxue tribe. In the past, they had all participated in attacking other tribes. If they were attacking a small tribe, they would rush forward one by one. First come, first served, and those who were slow would not get anything. But this time, they weren't sure about the war with the Yanjiao. They had never thought that they would be attacked in their lifetime. Yanjiao had declared war on them. What a headache. The current situation in the Wanxue tribe proved that if you robbed, you had to pay back. What will the slave masters do? Feng Wu looked at the Wanxue shaman. After a while, the Wanxue shaman had calmed down. He thought for a moment and said, "I don't think so." Feng Wu violently smashed a wooden table next to him into pieces. Those. Feng Wu wanted to curse, but he was still afraid of the slave masters. Who knew if there were any slave masters listening in? The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. He held back his anger and took deep breaths. Are we really going to fight? I heard. The Yanjiao people are quite strong. A small leader stammered.
He was promoted because of his meritorious service when he went out to rob a small tribe at the end of last year.
Compared to the other senior leaders, he was still too inexperienced. He didn't know that there were some words that could never be said at this time.
Sure enough, as soon as the small leader finished speaking, he suddenly felt his vision blur.
A strong murderous aura hit him so hard his legs went weak. He didn't even have a chance to beg for mercy. Feng Wu appeared in front of the small leader like a shadow. He raised his arm, hiding a terrible power under the bulging muscles. When he clenched his fist and rushed out, it was like a shot of a cannonball. The sound of it breaking through the air was like a ferocious poisonous snake, releasing its deadly murderous intent. The fist that rushed out smashed heavily into the chest of the sub-leader who had just spoken. The powerful impact and the power of this punch directly caused the sub-leader's back to explode. Blood and pieces of flesh spurted out behind him. When he pulled back his arm, Feng Wu was still holding a lump of flesh in his hand. It was the heart. The small leader didn't see the hole in his body. He didn't even have time to hide the fear on his face. He fell down with a thump. The other leaders in the room seemed to have expected this scene. They didn't look at it. They just shivered and lowered their heads in silence. The room was filled with a thick smell of blood, making the atmosphere more stagnant. Feng Wu shook off the blood and pieces of flesh in his hand. He didn't even look at the man on the ground. He said in a low voice, "Do you think I'm afraid of the Yanjiao? They're nothing. If we can dig their fire pit once, we can do it again." These words were for the others, and also for himself. The Wanshi shaman sat on the thick animal skin. He didn't speak, but when he lowered his head, his eyes flashed with disapproval. He didn't take the Yanjiao seriously before, but now he felt more and more uneasy. Especially the strange situation in the ferocious beast mountain forest a few days ago, he had been worried until now. However, he didn't feel any threat of life or death. The fire seed in the fire pit had grown bigger and looked more vigorous these days. As long as the fire seed was there, it could save his life. On the other side of the Wanshi tribe, the stone houses built were different from the original style of the Wanshi tribe. There were no drawings of the Wanshi tribe. This was the place of the slave owners. After they came to the Wanshi tribe, they drew out such a place. As for whether the chief of the Wanshi tribe agreed or not, how could the chief of the Wanshi tribe not agree? Without the support of the slave owners, how could the Wanshi tribe reach where it was today? At this time, in one of the stone houses, several slave owners gathered together to discuss. In front of them, there was a roll of animal skin. It was the same one that the Yanjiao tribe had tied to the spear and thrown out. "What do you think? Have you made up your mind?" An older slave owner asked. "Do you still need to think?" "It's not a good time to fight recklessly," a young slave owner said, lying on a chair. Although he didn't look old, there was a bit of momentum in his words, which showed that he used to be in a good position in the desert. On his clothes, there was the symbol of the Sky Wheel City in the desert. Next to him, a fat slave owner of the same age hugged a female slave and quickly said, Yes, it's not a good time to fight. If the Wanshi tribe wants to fight, let them fight. We don't have to fight. Besides, the Yanjiao people hate the Wanshi tribe. This roll of animal skin shows that the Yanjiao people don't want to fight with us." The expressions of the other people in the house changed. They quickly exchanged glances to test each other's opinions, but didn't want to show their thoughts at this time. The former young master of the White Stone City glanced at the people in the house. He saw that they were thoughtful for a while, then frowned and looked dignified. After a while, they seemed to understand each other. He knew that the longer they discussed, the worse the situation would be. He was one of the few people here who supported the Wanshi tribe. Unfortunately, he couldn't persuade the others. Just look at the young master of the Sky Wheel City who spoke first. There was a big disagreement here. Some people felt that if the Wanshi tribe suffered, they, the slave owners, would not get any benefits. Supporting the Wanshi tribe was supporting themselves. But some people also felt that the Wanshi tribe was out of control. It was better to let the Yanjiao destroy the Wanshi tribe. This way it would be easier to control them. Some people even hoped that the Yanjiao people would quickly destroy the Wanshi tribe's fire seed, so that they could take more Wanshi warriors as slaves. Perhaps, they could take advantage of the chaos to get more Yanjiao people as slaves? In the eyes of these slave owners, the tribesmen were all slaves. Countless slaves were the hope of their rise. Fight. It would be best if both sides suffered losses. Then they would take the opportunity to destroy the fire seed of both sides and recruit a large number of people. They were looking forward to it. Several slave owners were secretly calculating the abacus. Chapter 509. The Yanjiao people had no idea that the slave masters were plotting against them. Even if they did, they would laugh at them. What a bunch of idiots! If the fire seed was still concentrated in the fire pit, the slave masters might have had some hope. After all, it was the source of power for a tribe. However, the Yanjiao fire seed had long been integrated into every Yanjiao person. Even though the Wanshi people and the slave masters could sense the change in the Yanjiao fire seed, they never thought that it was the fusion of the fire seed. Because such a thing had never happened here before. Not every slave master knew some secrets. That was why the slave masters who escaped the desert and hid in the Wanshi tribe didn't know much about the fire seed. This led them to have a misconception. They kept this misconception, thinking that as long as the fire seed was gone, it would be time for the slave masters to rise again. Many of them even thought about going back to the desert and taking revenge on the people of Rock Hill City. The slave masters were scheming. The Wanshi people were preparing for war. In the fearsome beast forest, the Yanjiao people had already begun a large-scale adjustment. Those who couldn't participate in the battle retreated to their original hiding spot. The terrain there was easy to defend and difficult to attack. If there were any changes, they could deal with it for a while. The wanderers had other places to settle down. When Xiao Xian returned to the tribe from the edge of the forest, he saw a group of warriors chatting together. They had just finished their training and were standing there in high spirits. This time, we're going to drive the Wanshi tribe out of here. We won't leave any land outside the forest for them. We'll take it all and farm it. That's right. They destroyed our fire pond before. Let's dig up their fire ponds as well. Yes, dig it up. These were the people who saw the mess when they returned to the old haunt. They were all excited when they talked about it. They wanted to kill all the Wanshi people. Every tribe had a bottom line. Anyone who crossed that line would be provoked and declared war. This battle had been delayed for a long time. Now it was finally here. Ferocious beasts were driven away by fighting, not persuasion. To the Flaming Horn tribesmen, the Wanshi tribesmen were ferocious beasts lurking around their nest, ready to bite them at any moment. They had to use their fists and blood-stained blades to kill the ferocious beasts. Even if they couldn't kill them, they had to chase them away. How could he allow others to snore beside his bed? It was simply intolerable. Not everyone could coexist peacefully with Yanjiao like the Taiha tribe. Lei and Tuo were also among them, and their well-defined faces showed fortitude and expectation. Tuo was holding a stone knife in his hand, which was the knife he was used to. Although the tribe had also made a copper knife, they could not make it into the knife he was used to, and it was not easy to use. There was a big difference between a stone knife and a copper knife. The feeling was not right, and he could not find the right feeling. He was about to fight with Wanshi. He did not want to give his opponent a chance because of a saber that was not easy to use. Xiao Xian found that there were some wood chips on Tuo's knife. Apparently, he had gone to training not long ago to simulate people with wood and practice chopping. How are the preparations going? Xiao Xian asked Tuo when he passed by with Duo Kong and the other two. Not bad. Tuo laughed. I'm looking forward to revenge. The contradiction between Tuo and Lei and the Wanshi tribe and the slave owners was deeper. When they went to the desert with Xiao Xian, they were caught in the beast city and thrown into the Colosseum. If it weren't for Xiao Xian, they would have become two of the victims of the Colosseum. It would have been impossible for them to return to the old land alive. The people who had betrayed Lei and Tuo were the new Wanshi shaman and the people of Baisha City. They still remembered this hatred, and now the new hatred and old hatred were avenged together. Lei's eyes flashed with anger and excitement. Finally, there was a chance for revenge. This day had finally come. War was an important part of human social activities. Whether it was between tribes or slave owners, there were always some big and small frictions. These would cause friction and contradictions, and war was the most direct way to solve these frictions. The ultimate goal was survival. Duo Kong and the others were no strangers to this. Snatching territory, resources, salt mines, and so on were all obtained through war. For the other half of the people, this was their first large-scale war in 1,000 years. Xiao Xian was thinking when he suddenly heard someone call him. Xian, the shaman wants you to go over. Mai ran over from not far away and said to Xiao Xian. At this time, The shaman wanted Xueqi to go over. There must be something important to discuss. Without delay, Xueqi and the other two parted ways and ran towards the shaman. The two shamans' houses were not far from each other. After arriving, Xueqi saw Ao and Zhang Luo standing at the door of the old shaman's house. Seeing Xueqi, Ao nodded towards the house, motioning for Xueqi to hurry in. Walking quickly, Xueqi found that the old shaman was there too. The two shamans each sat on a thick animal skin, looking like they were waiting for Xueqi. Xueqi walked over and sat on a large animal skin on the ground in front of them. Do the two shamans have something to tell me? The old shaman looked up at Xueqi. Do you know what to do in the battle with Wanshi? Xueqi nodded. Yes. When the time comes, I will take the lead with the 3 team leaders. The battle plan had been laid out, but Wanshi's people were already prepared. The effect of a sneak attack was not necessarily good. They still had to attack by force. Once the battle started, the warriors with high status in the tribe would naturally be at the front. This time, the two shamans would not lead the charge. They would be in charge of commanding from the back. Duo Kong and the other 2 team leaders would be at the front. The shamans would also use this opportunity to evaluate their performance. As the Grand Elder of the tribe, Xueqi could not fall behind. If he went with Duo Kong and the other 2, who in the tribe would trust him in the future? Just because of the blessings of the ancestors and previous contributions? No matter how great the contributions were, their influence would still decline after a long time. Xueqi was already mentally prepared. This was not the first battle, but this was the largest one. It would be a lie to say that he was not stressed. Although he knew that it was very dangerous to be at the front, this was a place where strength was respected. He had to act when he had to. Plus, this was the first large-scale battle between the Yanjiao tribes. Those with high status in the tribe naturally had to be the vanguard, boost morale, and lead the troops. The higher the status, the greater the responsibility. Hearing Xueqi's words, the 2 shamans nodded. It was rare that they did not object. In the past, if they heard that Xueqi was going to a dangerous place, they would definitely be the first to object. But now, the tribe was complete. In order to return to glory, they would have to go through more in the future. If Xueqi wanted to stabilize his position in the tribe, he had to show new results. Only then would the people in the tribe be more convinced. In this battle with Wanshi, your mission is different from Gigu and the others. The shaman said, their targets are the Wanshi people, the leaders of Wanshi. Your target is the fire seed of Wanshi. Xueqi's eyes widened. Wanshi's fire seed? That's right. If possible, destroy their fire seed. Don't give them a chance to transport it away. Tua and the others will help you. Of course, the Wanshi people will definitely guard the fire pit. If you can't find a chance, just wait until the battle is over. But if there is a chance... I know, Xueqi nodded, then asked, if there is a chance, what should I do to destroy the fire seed? Well, the old shaman stroked his beard. According to our ancestors, you should use the power of inheritance. It will guide you. The 2 shamans had no experience in destroying a fire seed. They had only heard that the shaman's power of inheritance was needed to completely extinguish the enemy's fire seed. Many tribes would clean up the battlefield after the battle before sending the shamans to destroy the fire seed. But they had only heard about it. After all, they had never seen it with their own eyes. They could only tell him what they knew. Don't force yourself. Your life is the most important. At worst, when the battle is over and we've cleaned up most of the Wanshi people, we'll go personally, said the shaman. Yes, I know. Don't worry. Xueqi said solemnly. The 2 shamans' hearts thumped at the same time. They felt more and more uneasy. At this time, they suddenly regretted telling Xueqi these things. Before Xueqi left, they repeatedly told him, don't force yourself. Do what you can. The people in the tribe had almost been transferred. When Xueqi returned from the shaman's place, Caesar was carrying a big bag. He was helping Old Ku and the people around to transport things. The most obvious thing was Old Ku's big box with various stone tools. Old Ku had polished many weapons and distributed them to the people who were also transferred to avoid the battle. Although they were old and weak, they were not without a little bit of fighting power. If they encountered sneak attacks, they could still fight with weapons. Don't worry about us. Be careful. Old Ku patted Xueqi's shoulder hard. He knew that Xueqi was the vanguard like the 3 team leaders. This was different from hunting. The people who rushed in front had to bear much more pressure and danger. Old Ku couldn't help but worry. If it was someone else, Old Ku would definitely think that as a person with such a high status in the tribe, he was not old or a shaman. He was strong and young. How could he feel embarrassed to hide in the back? But when it was Xiao Xian, Old Ku had a different idea. It was a natural double standard. It was human nature. The shamaness also asked someone to make some close-fitting clothes for us with the rest of the white worm skins. Xiao Xian showed the white worm skins he was wearing inside to Old Ku. These are good for protection. Old Ku just sighed and didn't say anything. There was no such thing as absolute protection in the world. Even if the worm skins were hard to cut, it was just hard to cut. It wasn't impossible to cut. Otherwise, how could the worm skin clothes be made? Besides, how could they be fine after being hit by an axe? 2 days later, most of the non-combatants in the tribe had been transferred. The 2 shamans were also transferred. Dawn came, but the sky was still dark. Xiao Xian sat by the fire pit and looked at the people who gathered. "Let's go." Xiao Xian got up and patted Caesar beside him. He led him to the team. Chapter 5:10. The sky was still dark. At this time, Wancher's guards had not changed shifts. Those who had been on duty all night were tired. Those who changed shifts might not have woken up yet. The birds that the slave masters raised to patrol in the sky were not active either. When Xiao Xian and the others arrived at the edge of the forest, the sky above was already dimly lit. The birds that usually woke up early were ready to chirp. Ao looked at Zhang Luo. Seeing Zhang Luo nod, he raised his hand and the people in the forest rushed out. They were very fast but their movements were very light. For a moment, only the rustling of clothes and leaves could be heard. The team quickly approached the Wancher tribe. Wancher's guards weren't idiots either. Ever since the Flaming Horn's fire seed mutated in the forest, they had been on alert. Although they were exhausted after a night of guarding, it was impossible that they didn't notice the Flaming Horn's approach. Enemy attack! A loud shout disturbed the quiet atmosphere in the Wancher tribe. A sharp bone whistle pierced the silence of dawn. The surroundings were filled with killing intent. Yanjiao's troops were still some distance away from Wancher's outskirts. But when Wancher's troops moved, Yanjiao's troops moved too. Inside Wancher's camp, torches were lit one by one. Although it was already dawn, the sky was still dark. Those with poor eyesight could not see clearly. Plus, they were in a hurry. It was easy to make mistakes if they did not light the torches. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The sound of something tearing through the air resounded in the sky. It was as if a sharp arrow was piercing through the air at high speed. Those with quick reflexes had already raised bone shields in front of them. The sound came from above. Yanjiao's troops were not very close, so the chances of them being shot were low. But soon, they realized something was wrong. As the sound of the arrows piercing through the air got closer and closer, some people carefully tilted their heads and looked up at the sky. Under the hazy light in the sky, a dense number of arrows were shuttling back and forth, but those arrows seemed to be a little too big. Bang, 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 crack. The sound of arrows falling like raindrops. The person holding the shield only felt that the moment the shield was hit, the strong impact made his hand go numb. When he looked at the arrow on the ground next to him, his eyes immediately widened. What kind of arrow was that? It was clearly a spear. It was similar to the long spear that was stuck at the door that day. It had a wooden handle and a stone spearhead. The handle was thick and the spearhead was very sharp. Most of the stone spearheads that hit the shield were shattered by the strong impact, leaving only the wooden shaft. This startled the people of Wanshi. If it were just a few dozen or 100 of these spears, it would be fine. But in the previous round, there were thousands of them. The people of Wanshi had never seen any tribe use spears as arrows. This arrow was too big. It was probably only the Yanjiao people who took it for granted. After all, the Yanjiao people were strong. After that, the second wave of spears descended. This time, the people of Wanshi all picked up their shields. Some hid behind the stone walls or other objects to avoid this round of spears. When the spears were thrown, the people in front of the Yanjiao team did not stop. After the second wave of spears, the people in front of them followed closely behind. By now, the outer walls of the Wanshi tribe could be seen clearly. The moment the second wave of spears was thrown, Xiao Xian knew it was time for him to move. Go! Xueqi rushed out in large strides. He ran quickly, then jumped up and landed on Tuo's sword in front of him. Tuo's strong hand grasped the hilt of the sword. Then he waved the sword violently, using the force of the sword to send Xueqi flying. Duo Kong, Gigu, and Ta did the same thing as Xueqi. 4 figures, like 4 goshawks, rushed out from the group, wanting to soar into the clouds. As the 4 figures left, the team burst into cheers. Xueqi felt the cool dawn wind blowing in his face. He could smell the moist water vapor and the smell of mud in the cool wind. He could feel the strong murderous intent and desire to fight from the team below. It seemed to have spread to every corner. The team was like before when they were hunting. However, when they were hunting, they did not have such a strong aura. After all, when hunting, they often had to control their aura. But now, on the battlefield, their aura was completely released. Xueqi had never felt such a strong murderous intent from the people of the tribe. It was filled with blood and desire to fight that could not be ignored. It seemed that every pore of their body was erupting with this murderous intent. Every one of them was no longer a hunter in the forest. At this moment, the murderous intent that had been suppressed in their bodies erupted like a volcano. Thousands of murderous intents twisted together, like a wave of blood and savagery. It rose to an unprecedented height and slammed towards the Wanxue tribe. The totemic power in Xueqi's body seemed to have sensed the information released from the surroundings, instantly spreading throughout his body. The dark purple totemic patterns were not obvious under the dim sky, but they were even more dangerous. The Wanxue tribe was getting closer and closer. Xueqi flew over the outer wall of the Wanxue tribe. He pulled out his sword and blocked an arrow. Then he crashed into a man holding a shield. Crack! There was the sound of bones breaking. The man below did not even have the chance to scream. His body seemed to have lost its support. He fell to the ground, dead. The man holding the shield probably did not expect someone to fall from the sky and trample him to death. Xueqi's sudden appearance stunned the surrounding Wanxue people. There were at least a dozen people hiding from the rain of spears. They did not expect someone to jump from the sky. They probably did not expect to encounter such a crazy thing. Although they were surprised, they quickly adjusted and charged towards Xueqi with their weapons. Xueqi's back shot out like a bow. He swung his sword forward with the ferocity of the Yanjiao people. It was as if he was going to split the mountains and rivers. His bold and fierce aura suppressed the surrounding people, and the surrounding people who were raising their swords paused slightly. Clang! The person who took Xueqi's sword head-on lost his weapon and flew backwards. Xueqi did not look at him. He charged into the crowd. In an instant, Xueqi's entire body seemed to have transformed into a storm, sweeping across the battlefield. His sword flashed like an electric current, and his kicks were like a gust of wind. He used both his hands and feet, and the sound of air being cut rang out. Every strike seemed to have the force of 1,000 kilograms, and his power was like a hurricane. Every strike of his sword would cut down someone, and every kick would kick someone out of the battlefield. The sounds of metal against metal, metal against stone, fists and feet colliding with flesh rang out incessantly. Every sound was enough to shake one's soul. Xueqi could not count how many people he had. He did not have the time. He could not be distracted. All his energy was focused on this battle. Facing the torrential rain of swords, fists and kicks, Xueqi was immersed in a subtle state. All of his senses were heightened, and he could even clearly feel the movements of the opponent's blade as it passed by him. He could feel the opponent's fierce eyes revealing what he was going to do next, and he could feel where the opponent's blade was going to cut him. The more he fought, the more Xueqi felt like he was facing the seawall again. It was just like when he led the tribesmen on the stone path in the sea. At that time, he mostly relied on the strength of his ancestors. But now, his ancestors could not help him much. He was fighting with his own strength. Here, survival was like this. If you did not break through the obstacles in front of you, you would be suppressed. Behind the peace, there was always blood and slaughter. This was the most primitive rule. After being in the tribe for so many years, Xueqi had gradually integrated into this large group. He was one with Yanjiao. He wasn't alone. He had many companions behind him. He came to fight not only for himself, but also for the people who had been placed in the shelter. He also came for the glory of the Flaming Horn tribe that had passed away. I'm from the Flaming Horn tribe. I fight for the tribe. The excited factor in his blood seemed to have been stimulated, rapidly increasing. In his mind, the totem flames were raging, and the totem patterns on his body were like growing vines, becoming denser. If one looked carefully, one could see that under the deep purplish-black patterns, there were different shades of purplish-red flowing. The surrounding Wanshi warriors stared at Xueqi in shock. He was surrounded, but he did not seem weak at all. He had the courage to fight alone. Every strike was fierce and powerful. But this person was like a fish. He dodged the endless swords and punches without fear. After Xueqi, other Yanjiao people arrived. They were sent over the wall in the same way as Xueqi and joined the battle. The wall was high and could block a lot of trouble. But the Wanshi people probably did not expect the Yanjiao to throw people over. The smell of blood and slaughter quickly spread. Blood dyed the dawn red, and the wind that blew by also carried a murderous aura that made people tremble. The surrounding creatures all stayed away as if they were fleeing for their lives. They wanted to get out of this place. When the Yanjiao attacked, the Wanshi leaders came out one after another. Knowing that the Yanjiao would attack, Xueqi was not surprised. But seeing the situation now, he could not help but feel angry. When he took over as leader, only the Wanshi people attacked others. They had never been attacked. Bai Xiu, the leader of the Wanshi army, was standing on a high ground. He opened his eyes wide and looked around. He saw everything and his eyes flashed with a cold light. Then he roared, "Kill them!" Before his voice faded, Xueqi had already jumped down from the high ground. After a few leaps, he rushed toward the battlefield. The wind was like thunder, like the beating of war drums. Behind Xueqi, the others also joined the battle. Two tribes, two different forces. Neither side backed down. Like two ocean currents, they crashed into each other, creating countless whirlpools. Even the wind was messed up. Chapter 5:11. With the addition of Wanshi's main force, the others retreated from the battlefield with pained expressions. By now, the Wanshi people had a rough idea of who the leaders of Yanjiao's side were. Ordinary Wanshi people couldn't fight these vanguards. They could only leave it to the stronger members of the tribe. Soldier against soldier, general against general. Up until now, in order to block Xueqi's attack, even if the people around Xueqi were not cut down or kicked away, they were all injured. In order to block Xueqi's attack, they could clearly feel the blood boiling in their chests, as if it was about to rush out of their throats. If they were distracted, they would suffer a fierce kick and be sent flying out of the battlefield. The Wanshi people couldn't help cursing in their hearts. This kid was too strong. Even if they could only withstand the residual force, they felt their arms and legs go numb. If this continued, they wouldn't even have the strength to hold their weapons. In fact, it wasn't just these people. For Xueqi, it was more difficult. The continuous fierce battle made his chest heave up and down. His breathing wasn't easy. At this time, every second felt infinitely long. It felt like a long time, but in fact, it was only a few dozen seconds. Xueqi's physical strength was better. At the same time, he relied on his aura to suppress the others. That was why he could withstand the siege and break through. Fortunately, with the addition of Yanjiao's reinforcements, Xueqi had an easier time. "Get out of the way!" A man holding a shiny golden mace strode over with large strides. His eyes were filled with an ominous glint, and his entire body was emitting a strong killing intent, causing people to tremble in fear upon seeing him. This was one of the leaders of the Wanshi tribe. He came with Bien, but Bien went to deal with the other side. He came with his men. Seeing that a group of people couldn't take down a kid, the leader was furious. His nostrils flared and his eyes flashed with cold light. As soon as they saw this person, the people surrounding Xueqi, as well as those who were rushing over, all turned around. They would not join the battle between the leaders. If they did, they would only be affected. They would not go over and seek death. When the leader rushed over, Xueqi clearly felt the immense pressure from his running. The mace in the other party's hand was probably made from materials provided by the slave masters. It looked more like a modified spear. The front of the mace had a sharp blade like a spearhead. Below the tip was a thickened mace with spikes like a wolf's fangs. Further back was the long mace. As the leader rushed over, he turned the mace at an angle. The spikes on the mace had a murderous aura, as if he was going to kill his opponent. Xueqi pushed back the two Wanshi warriors in front of him. Without pausing, he bent his knees and shot towards the Wanshi leader. The two sides ran towards each other. The distance between them shortened in the blink of an eye. Xiao Xian's entire arm that was wielding the sword cut through the air, causing the air to crackle, like the sound of wind and thunder. The Wancher leader planted his feet on the ground, swinging his mace to meet Xiao Xian's sword. Xiao Xian's sword was specially made for him by Gongjia Heng. He knew that the Yanjiao people were strong, so this sword was bigger and wider than most swords in Royal City. He didn't know what Gongjia Heng added to the sword, but it was obviously heavier than other swords of the same size. However, to Xiao Xian, this weight was nothing. Sometimes he even wished it was heavier. The sword drew a bright arc in the air, like heavy dark clouds during a rainstorm. At the moment of the collision, the Wancher leader felt a numbing pain in his arms, as if he had been hit by many sticks. The momentum he had just gained was almost dissipated by this blow. His hand holding the stick split open, and blood spurted out along with the vibration of his wrist. Although he knew that the Yanjiao people were strong, this was his first time fighting a Yanjiao person head-on. The pressure was stronger than he expected. Every bone and muscle in his body seemed to be trembling under this attack. They were screaming and emitting creaking sounds, losing their original coordination. His heart pounded violently, as if it was going to jump out of his chest. The blood vessels in his arms felt like they were going to explode. In that instant, the Wancher leader knew he had underestimated this flaming horn kid. At this moment, he couldn't think of anything else. He was terrified. If all the young flaming horns were like this person, would Wancher still have a chance to survive? Perhaps the leader had made the wrong decision. They should have left early. Someone had once told them that Yanjiao was a glorious tribe 1,000 years ago. Even the well-known powerful tribes in the central region were afraid of Yanjiao. However, no one believed that after 1,000 years of Yanjiao's disappearance, after 1,000 years of decline, they could return to their peak. Boom! It was as if a bomb had exploded. The ground where the two were fighting suddenly caved in. At the same time, the stones and dirt on the ground were blasted into the air, sending smoke and dust everywhere. Those close to the fight felt the ground shake. Those who were weaker even felt like they couldn't stand properly. At that moment, it was as if someone had taken off their brain. However, this wasn't because Xiao Xian and the Wancher leader had caused a violent earthquake. It was because of the impact of the collision, which affected the minds of those around them. They felt like the ground was shaking and they couldn't stand properly. However, this wasn't the end. Two silhouettes rushed out from the smoke and dust. Before the surrounding people could hide far away, the clanging sound of metal weapons colliding rang out again. Moreover, it was a series of metal clanging sounds. After a thunderous explosion, the next moment, it was as if there was a giant worm crawling under the ground. The soil was flipped up and rolled in the air before falling back down. The Wancher warrior, who happened to be standing in the line of impact, only felt a strong pressure, like a huge rock flying towards him, hit his chest hard, and he flew out like a sandbag. Seeing that the people around him couldn't help, the Wancher leader became anxious. He didn't fight Xiao Xian head-on anymore. As he retreated, he let out a series of strange cries. He couldn't continue to block this brat. He had already reached his limit. If this continued, he would definitely end up in a worse state than those who were sent flying just now. His head might even be chopped off by this flaming horn brat. Two figures jumped out of the battle circle not far away and came this way. Xiao Xian knew that they were looking for reinforcements. Just as he was about to kill this man who was at the end of his rope before the reinforcements arrived, he suddenly paused. The two people who were coming this way were blocked. The panting leader sensed that something was wrong. Just as he was about to retreat, someone grabbed his armor and lifted him up. He was dragged in a certain direction. Before he could react, he was thrown into the wall of a house not far away. He smashed into the wall with a loud bang. He had been a leader for so many years and had led people to attack other tribes many times. He used to be one of the most important helpers of the leader. When had he ever been lifted up and thrown out like this? Even the leader, Feng Wu, had never done this to them. This kind of way of talking about him as if he was talking about a small prey was simply insulting. However, he was already injured internally by Xiao Xian. Even though he was angry, he couldn't rush over and fight back. He couldn't join the battle now. If he wanted to fight, he could only fight against other ordinary beginner warriors. He couldn't fight against the leader of the other side. If he went, he would be courting death. After blocking the two people coming this way, Gigu freed one hand and threw the leader out. He quickly signaled to Xiao Xian that he would block this side and let Xiao Xian do his own thing. Since Gigu had come over and there were other Yanjiao warriors approaching, Xiao Xian didn't hesitate. He rushed out of the encirclement and headed in one direction. Xiao Xian's main target was the fire pit. Gigu, Duokong and Ta all knew this, so they had to help Xiao Xian while keeping an eye on the Wancher chief and other leaders. Tuo and the others had already come over. They were instructed by the shaman to go with Xiao Xian to the fire pit of Wancher. Most of the people who came with Tuo were members of the advance group of the hunting team. Some of them used to follow Gue He, and some used to follow Ta. They used to compete and quarrel with each other. But now, they put aside their prejudice and cooperated with each other. Most of the fire pits of a tribe were in the center of the tribe. It was not easy to get there. There were a lot of people blocking the way, including many slaves. Because of the high temperature and exposure in the desert, the slaves' skin color was darker than others, so they were easy to recognize. Among these slaves, a large part of them were slaves from Whitestone City, which could be recognized from the slave marks on their bodies. Seeing the slaves of Whitestone City, Tuo and Lei's eyes flashed fiercely. Among the several cities in the desert, they hated Whitestone City the most. Whitestone City not only had a close relationship with the Wancher tribe, but also had raised a Yanjiao trader. They roared and waved their sharp blades, killing the Whitestone City slaves in front of them. Their blades whistled through the air. The deeper they went, the more Xiao Xian felt the repulsive force of the Wancher fire seed. He believed that other Yanjiao people could feel it too. The influence of the fire seed could not be ignored. But when he felt the repulsive force, Xiao Xian found that there seemed to be another feeling that was different from the repulsive force. The Wancher chief, who had been injured internally by Xiao Xian and thrown out by Gigu, was now leaning against the wall, hiding in a corner. He panted and watched Xiao Xian and the others approaching the fire pit. He sneered but did not chase after them, nor did he let the others chase after them. It was not that he didn't care about the fire pit. As a chief of a tribe, he was also very worried about the fire pit. After all, the fire pit was related to the survival of the tribe. However, the shaman was guarding the fire pit. Those Yanjiao people could not destroy the fire pit, and might even die under the fire pit. Was the fire pit of the Wancher tribe so easy to get close to? Even those slave owners who had been harboring evil intentions did not dare to directly target their Wancher fire seed. That was the strongest place in the whole Wancher tribe. Otherwise, why would the Wancher tribe be called Wancher? Chapter 5:12. Xiao Xian and his men approached Wancher's fire pit. Strangely, the closer they got to Wancher's fire pit, the more slaves they saw. There were not many Wancher people. Wouldn't the people of Wancher be worried that the slave masters would destroy their fire seed if they let the slave masters help them around the fire pit? Were they too careless? Or were they not worried at all? Xiao Xian had to be more careful. Signaling the others to be alert, Xiao Xian did not stop waving his sword. Xiao Xian's sword was bigger and heavier than most people's, so he did not use it in a nimble way. Instead, he used it in a more direct way. Just like when he hunted, he used the least amount of energy and time to make the most effective response. At the same time, he used the Yanjiao's fierceness and agility. All of his skills were honed through hunting and actual combat. Clang! Xiao Xian slashed at a high-level slave in front of him. Because the other party's rank among the slaves was relatively high, they received better treatment. Compared to other ordinary slaves, these high-level slaves did not wear ordinary leather armor or protective armor made of animal bones. Instead, they wore metal armor, like a tortoiseshell, protecting their torso from the front and back. There were also many protective equipment on their arms and legs. Xiao Xian's sword was aimed at the slave's neck. But the slave was prepared. Unable to dodge, he could only move aside and let the armor block the attack. However, even if he was wearing a turtle shell-like metal armor, it was not guaranteed that he would be able to defend against the attack. Xiao Xian's sword was indeed blocked by the armor. However, when the sword and the armor collided, other than the crisp sound of metal clashing, there was also a loud bang. A clear dent appeared on the armor. But this was not the most fatal. The vibration from the armor pushed the air inward. Under the armor, the slave's chest caved in as if something heavy had pressed down on it. If one listened carefully, they could hear the cracking of bones. Even metal armor would not be able to withstand such an attack. Xiao Xian didn't look at the slave who vomited blood and fell to the ground, nor did he have time to look. He continued to face the other people who tried to stop him. On the ground of the Wancher tribe, the grass was not dense. Perhaps because people often walked and stepped on it, there was a lot of empty ground and the soil was exposed.
At this time, because of the fierce battle, the earth on the ground was splattered all over due to the kicking, slashing and smashing.
Everyone seemed to have blended into the battlefield.
Xueqi could hear the rapid and heavy breathing of the people around him, their chests rising and falling like the low growls of wild beasts in the forest. The weapons in everyone's hands moved quickly, breaking through the air and making a hissing sound, touching people's nerves. The sharp weapons in the hands of the soldiers swept past, bringing with them a burst of cold light that was filled with killing intent. They were barbaric and ferocious as they charged forward, bringing with them a pungent smell of blood and a dense killing intent. The ground was already dyed red with blood. His line of sight passed through the bodies of the slaves in front of him and saw the person standing there.
Although more than 2 years had passed, Xueqi still had an impression of that person. That was the young master of the Baisha city. Xueqi had seen him in the stands of the Colosseum. Looking at Xueqi's eyes, the young master of the Baisha city was stunned. He only felt that Xueqi was very familiar, as if he had seen him before. But it had been too long, and many things had happened in the past 2 years, so the young master of the Baisha city couldn't remember for the time being. The young master of the Baisha city quickly searched his mind for where he had seen this person before. As Xueqi and his people got closer and closer, the young master of the Baisha city retreated a little more. Not far away, there were the howls and roars of the Wanshi beasts. It was the Wanshi beasts of the Wanshi tribe who were fighting with the Yanjiao beasts. The Wanshi beasts were the killing machines that were selected and cultivated by the Wanshi tribe. Before the arrival of the Yanjiao tribe, the people of the Wanshi tribe had selected the best Wanshi beasts and let them enter the mountains to fight with the beasts. Therefore, even now, in the face of the Yanjiao beasts, this group of killing machines that had been selected from generation to generation did not know fear. Even if they hurt the enemy 100 times, they would do it. They lived to kill and they died to kill. The Wanshi beasts always reminded the slave owners of the Colosseum city in the desert. Many of the fighting beasts in the Colosseum city were also cultivated in a similar way. It could be said that the Wanshi tribe followed the slave owners and learned this method. After escaping from the desert, the slave owners often recalled their life in the desert and the Colosseum city. Listening to the roars of the beasts, the young master of the Baisha city could not help but think of the Colosseum city in the desert. Then his whole body shook as he thought of a person. It was him. It was that kid. The young master of the Baisha city stared at the direction of Xueqi. He remembered. That kid was the kid who had appeared in the Colosseum city. Xueqi's performance in the Colosseum was still fresh in the memory of many slave owners. However, at that time, Xueqi was wearing a hat and his appearance was not real. Others may not recognize him, but after the Colosseum city, Dao Yu had identified him and told the Baisha young master the identity of the person in the Colosseum city. If it were other things, the young master of the Baisha city may not have such a deep impression. However, Xueqi had followed the group of people from Luoya city. In the eyes of the slave owners who fled the desert, Luoya city was a traitor. The desert cities were destroyed one by one, but Luoya city survived. The people of Luoya city not only lived well in the desert, but also had a larger territory. The people who destroyed Baisha city were mainly Luoya city. Luoya city was the dog of the Shi family in Rock Hill city. The Baisha young master's hatred for Luoya city was now transferred to Xueqi. After all, Xueqi used to follow the third young master of Luoya city, Su Gu. Moreover, since the Colosseum city, Baisha's luck was getting worse and worse. Not only did the king die, but the entire Baisha city did not exist for long. If he had not been prepared and escaped, the whole army would have been wiped out. The Baisha young master's eyes were fierce. He ordered the slaves around him to take out their bows and arrows. His eyes stared at Xueqi's position. Violent emotions gathered in his pair of hazy eyes. He took the bow in his hand, which was made of rare materials from the desert beasts, and pulled it almost into a full moon shape. All the resentment since escaping the desert was integrated into this strong bow. Perhaps the Baisha young master was not good at other things, but he was quite capable of archery. At this time, the Baisha young master had ignored everything except the target. He did not think about whether he might accidentally hurt his own people. At this time, he only had Xueqi in his eyes. Whoosh! With the vibration of the bowstring, the arrow spun at high speed, making a sharp whistling sound in the air. The sharp metal arrowhead broke through the air in front of it, flashing like a meteor, and went straight to Xueqi. The sharp whistling sound of the arrow wherever it passed, whether it was the slaves or the Yanjiao warriors who were fighting with it, they all felt like their eardrums were being scratched by someone,
stinging pain. Xiao Xian was on guard when the other stared at him. He could see the general idea from the other's eyes. That undisguised killing intent passed through the chaotic crowd in front of him. Blocking the slaves who attacked from the side, Xiao Xian's eyes reflected the way the other pulled the bow. He did not dodge, his legs firmly rooted to the ground like ancient trees. The tumbling totemic power in his body surged, and his breath seemed to carry the heat of fire. With a flick of his wrist, the sword was raised, and the momentum of the arrow was fierce like a meteor. Clang! The two powerful forces collided, and the sound of the explosion was especially ear-piercing in the noisy battlefield. The arrow that hit the sword was deflected and flew to other places. Xiao Xian's sword, on the other hand, only left a shallow mark. The white stone young master finally noticed the sword in Xiao Xian's hand. It wasn't that he had never seen a sword made of metal, but the style and material were very different. In terms of forging skills, Whitestone City was far inferior to the 3 desert cities of the past. Whitestone City had very little contact with metal to begin with, but after the desert became chaotic, they managed to snatch some. But Xiao Xian's sword was not ordinary, and this shocked the young master. It must have been given by the Shi family of Rock Hill City. Other than that, he couldn't think of any other reason. The Yanjiao tribe was indeed a dog of the Shi family of Rock Hill City. What a bastard! Kill them for me! The white stone young master roared, and ordered the slaves to fight the Yanjiao people. He retreated a bit further to avoid the battlefield, and there were other slaves around him to protect him. The white stone young master wanted to tell the slaves to snatch Xiao Xian's sword, but before he could speak, he saw a piercing cold light flash by Xiao Xian's side. Xiao Xian sped up and charged directly at him. When the sword slashed at the metal armor, the sound of bones breaking could be heard. Then the sharp edge of the blade cut through flesh, and blood flew up along with the broken limbs. The slaves that were kicked away were sent flying. The white stone young master didn't care if they were enemies anymore. When he saw Xiao Xian charging at him, he was so scared that his heart raced and his scalp tightened. He decisively turned around and ran as far as he could before anything else. After the chaos in the desert, the skill they learned the most was to run away. If they ran away from the battlefield, they wouldn't have to worry about that kid coming after them. They were just helping the Wanshur tribe, so they didn't need to risk everything. As he ran, he didn't forget to ask the slaves to protect him, in case someone shot at him. Xiao Xian wanted to get rid of the annoying slave master hiding behind and shooting arrows first. After that, the other slaves wouldn't have much will to fight. However, the white stone young master was running too fast. He wanted to throw a dart at him, but there were too many slaves around him. He might not be able to hit him. Seeing the white stone young master leave, Xiao Xian could only give up on that target and continue to lead his people towards the fire pit. Perhaps because of the white stone young master's departure, the slaves' will to fight wavered, giving the Yanjiao people a chance to charge forward. Other than the white stone slaves, there were slaves from other slave masters. However, those people seemed to be cannon fodder and weren't too difficult to deal with. The slave masters indeed had other intentions and weren't helping the Wanshur tribe wholeheartedly. The closer they got, the more Xiao Xian felt the rejection from the Wanshur fire seed. It stimulated the totemic power in his body even more. The fire seed in his body seemed to have met its match and couldn't wait to rush over. It wasn't just the tribes that fought. Fire seeds were also incompatible with each other. They all had a sense of, there's only you and there's only me. Chapter 5:13. Beside the fire pit, the shaman stood there with a slight sneer on his face. He listened carefully to the sounds of battle but didn't move. There wasn't a single Wanshur person beside him. The closest one was 50 meters away. With the Wanshur fire pit as the center, there was no one but the shaman within a 50-meter radius. Inside the fire pit, a gray flame flickered. That was the color of the Wanshur fire seed. The Wanshur shaman was worried when he saw the fire seed in the fire pit being suppressed into a small ball. However, as the flaming horn's fire seed disappeared, the fire seed in the Wanshur tribe's fire pit glowed again. It lost its opponent and returned to normal, just like how it was before the flaming horn tribe came here. This made the Wanshur shaman feel less worried, and he felt more at ease. He didn't know why Yanjiao's fire seed disappeared while Yanjiao's warriors retained their original abilities. But he knew that without the suppression of Yanjiao's fire seed, Wanshur's fire seed could unleash 100% of its power. What was there to fear if the Yanjiao tribe attacked? Yanjiao didn't have a fire seed, But Wansher's fire seed was still there. Wansher wasn't one of those small tribes that had to worry about survival. The power of the fire seed was the strongest. The Wansher shaman could not think of anyone who could extinguish the fire seed of Wansher, not even the slave masters. Did they want to wipe out Wansher? Yanjiao was delusional. Yanjiao had been down and out for 1,000 years. Even their thinking had become simple. Naive. If Yanjiao's fire seed was still there, he could be careful. But the Yanjiao people had dug their own graves and destroyed their fire seed. Ha ha ha. The shaman wanted to laugh. A war between the tribes was a war between fire seeds. Why didn't Yanjiao understand? Without their fire seed, how could they fight with them? As the Wansher shaman thought about it, the sneer on his face deepened. Hearing the sound, he raised his hand, and the fire seed in the fire pit behind him suddenly jumped up, swaying on its own without any wind, making banging sounds. However, it did not sound like the usual sounds, but more like the collision between rocks. When Xiaoxian finally arrived, he saw this strange scene. Different from the tight defense around the fire pit, there were less than 300 Wansher warriors here. Wansher claimed to have more than 10,000 people, but in reality, there weren't that many. Even if you counted those who couldn't fight, there were at most 7 or 8,000. But if you counted the slave masters and slaves, there were indeed more than 10,000 people. In addition, there were prisoners of war captured by Wansher. There were hundreds of them still alive. With more than 10,000 people, they were indeed considered a large tribe here. If Wansher hadn't gone out to attack the smaller tribes often and lost many people, they would have even more people. This time, Yanjiao sent 5,000 people to attack Wansher. Wansher had more warriors who could fight, plus the slaves of the slave masters who helped them, than Yanjiao. But at this time, if someone looked carefully, they would find that Yanjiao's casualties were much lower than Wansher's. Xiaoxian had a clear feeling when he was killing his way here. Therefore, when he saw that there were only 300 people guarding the fire pit, he was really surprised. Moreover, these 300 people weren't close to the fire pit. They had completely cleared out a large area around the fire pit. There were more than 100 Yanjiao warriors who had arrived with Xiaoxian, and more were coming. It wasn't difficult to deal with the 300 people. Among these 300 people, there were no leaders or team leaders. At most, there were 1 or 2 team leaders. But here, Xiaoxian had a strange feeling. The others also felt the strong repulsion and strangeness of the Wansher fire seed. Xiaoxian didn't rush to the fire pit immediately. He only dealt with the 3 million Wansher stone men outside. He also stopped the other Yanjiao warriors who wanted to rush forward. These 300 Wansher warriors didn't seem to want to fight Xiaoxian. After fighting for a while, they retreated to the fire pit. They didn't want to use the fire pit to improve their strength, but Xiaoxian felt that their behavior was more like luring the Yanjiao people to the fire pit. Would anyone lure people from other tribes to their own fire pit? There had to be something wrong within the 50-meter gap. Xiaoxian didn't need to say more. The other Yanjiao people could guess. Therefore, they only fought with the Wansher warriors outside the 50-meter circle. The Wansher shaman stood by the fire pit. Seeing more and more Yanjiao people gathering but not approaching, he didn't have the patience to wait any longer. A cruel smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He raised his arm, raised his head and let out a long howl. Then, Xiaoxian heard some words that Xiaoxian did not understand. If he had heard it before, he would have thought that it was just some meaningless syllables. However, at this moment, Xiaoxian felt a strong sense of danger. Retreat! Xiaoxian shouted. Hearing Xiaoxian's words, Tuo and the others paused and then retreated some distance away from the fire pit. Retreat again. Stay away. Xiaoxian continued shouting. The Yanjiao people wanted to retreat. Just now, there were too many Yanjiao people and some Wansher people who rushed over. At this time, a strange scene occurred. The Yanjiao people wanted to leave the fire pit, but the Wansher people didn't let them and kept blocking them. Bang! Bang! More and more urgent and loud sounds came from the Wansher fire pit. The grayish flame rose from the fire pit and filled it up. A column of flame suddenly shot up into the sky, like a volcanic eruption, spurting out balls of flame. The ball of fire that shot out from the pillar of fire tumbled in the air. At that moment, it seemed as if it wanted to cover the entire sky above. It carried with it the power to destroy the heavens and the earth as it came crashing down with a whistling sound. The Yanjiao people who saw this broke out in cold sweat. They were the first group of Yanjiao people to come here and were the closest to the fire pit. For the old soldiers, this was their first time attacking another tribe. For the people who came back from the other side, this was their first time attacking a tribe with a primitive fire seed. No matter which side they were from, they had never encountered such a situation before. The fire seed was too powerful. In front of this power, they felt like they were facing a king beast. No, not even a king beast would feel this much pressure. Staying there under such circumstances was simply courting death. Even if Chief Ao and Zheng Luo were here, they would run away first. The Wanshi shaman standing by the fire pit grinned. The sound coming from his mouth was even louder. 50 meters? How could it only be 50 meters? That was just a facade made by the Wanshi people. The power of the fire seed was far more than 50 meters. Fortunately, Xiao Xian shouted in advance. The Yanjiao people retreated quickly. The injured who could not run fast enough were carried by their companions. The others covered them as they ran. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of the balls of fire crashing down was like an angry roar, spreading into the distance. They were clearly just balls of fire, but when these balls of fire hit the ground, they were like heavy boulders falling to the ground. The ground trembled clearly, and in the blink of an eye, it became intense, and the earth trembled along with it. The fireballs started near the fire pit and quickly spread outwards. The fireballs were like giant rocks that fell to the ground, leaving behind a gray patch. Through these gray fireballs, one could vaguely see the shadow of the Wanshi shaman standing on the other side of the fire pit. Near the fire pit, the ground was covered in a layer of gray balls of fire. A second layer was piling up. The balls of fire looked like they were going to build a towering mountain. The balls of fire fell too quickly. With the Wanshi people blocking them, the first group of Yanjiao warriors could not run out of the range of the balls of fire in time. The warriors running outside could feel the pressure coming from behind. It was like a cold current was rapidly approaching. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end. They did not look up to see what was happening, but they could feel the weight of a mountain crashing down on them. The ground felt like it was going to collapse. The impact of the foreign tribe's fire seed still restricted the Flaming Horn warriors' mobility. It was obviously more difficult for them to run. They were panting heavily and their faces were pale. However, they could clearly feel the greater restriction. It was more difficult for them to move their legs. The shadow of death loomed over the heads of the Yanjiao warriors closest to the fire pit. Behind them were countless gray balls of fire. Every ball of fire smashed down with the force of a thunderbolt. It was like they were going to crush the people on the ground. Above their heads was an inescapable shadow. The shadow was spreading at a terrifying speed, as if it was going to cut off all escape routes. In the sky, the gray balls of fire that had spread out blocked the morning sun. They brought with them an unending desolate aura that pressed down. The surging air was filled with a bone-piercing chill. This was the last defense of the Wanshi tribe. It was also the strongest defense of the entire Wanshi tribe. No wonder the Wanshi leader believed in the power of the fire seed so much. To the tribesmen, the fire seed was the most sacred and powerful thing. The fire seed was synonymous with the power of heaven and earth. The Wanshi people believed that no one could break through this defense, unless a more powerful fire seed collided with it. But now, under the deep-rooted belief that the fire seed was rooted in the fire pit, which tribe would be willing to bring the fire seed out? They had dared to set up camp outside the fearsome beast forest because they believed that even if the beasts came out of the forest, they would avoid their tribe because of the fire seed. Their fire seed might not be as strong as the old masters, but at this moment, in this place, their fire seed was the strongest. It was the god that ruled everything. The slave masters did not choose to support the Wanshi tribe randomly. They had their reasons. The reason why those smart slave owners chose the Wanshi tribe was that the Wanshi tribe had the potential to become a powerful tribe. Chapter 5:14. The Wanshi tribe was called Wanshi because the fire seed was born in 10,000 stones. 10,000 stones formed a mountain, and the fire seed of the Wanshi tribe was born in them. On the other side of the gray flames, the shaman was a blurry figure. Because of the swaying of the flames and the swirling of the air, his figure looked distorted and strange. Although he couldn't see the shaman clearly, Xiao Xian could hear the maniacal laughter coming from the fire pit. Ha ha ha! Who told you Yanjiao people to not have the fire seed? Without it, let's see how you Yanjiao people will fight me. Boom! Boom! Balls of gray flames smashed onto the ground, creating a commotion similar to that of a meteor crashing to the ground. not giving anyone any time to breathe. The third layer of flames was already being built near the fire pit. The Yanjiao warriors carrying the wounded felt their bodies quickly becoming tired. The veins on their foreheads pulsed and large drops of sweat slid down their bodies. From the beginning until now, they had run less than 100 meters. Under normal circumstances, it would have taken them only a breath. But here at this moment, they felt like they were deeply trapped in a torrent. Every step they took was against the flow, and it was extremely difficult. The warriors on the side felt the same. They attacked fiercely, but they felt much of their strength being reduced. They felt weak and powerless. If not for the Yanjiao's strength, they would have been able to hold on for a while after being suppressed. If it had been anyone else, they would have been attacked by the Wanxia people long ago. Watch out! A large ball of gray flames smashed into the people there. The gray flames in the sky covered a large area and spread too quickly. They had no time to run. Even if they avoided this one, they couldn't avoid the other balls of fire. The 10 or so warriors gathered together and could only take it head-on. Seeing the gray flames smashing down, they could only raise the weapons in their hands as if to block it. The gray flames passed through the swords, spears, axes and rods, passed through the bodies of the warriors, and smashed into the ground with a thunderous boom. The ground under their feet trembled for a long time. Although the flames passed through the warriors' bodies and did not cause any visible damage, the flaming horn warriors felt like they were being crushed by a giant boulder. Their entire bodies felt like they were trapped inside, and there was a strong pressure all around them. Even their blood vessels felt like they were being crushed. Above their heads, there was even more pressure that made them panic. It was like giant boulders were falling down, and the boulders were piling up at a rapid pace. His heart felt like it was being squeezed by someone, and his heartbeat lost its usual rhythm. His lungs felt like they were frozen, and every breath he took was extremely difficult. His strength was decreasing rapidly, and the totem power in his body was like a hibernating animal encountering cold weather. He felt drowsy. The pressure was still increasing, and it was difficult for them to stand. The situation was not good. It wasn't just the flaming horn warriors who were trapped. Even the slave masters who were hiding in the periphery were terrified. Although they weren't trapped, the power of the fire seed terrified them. They could easily enslave a slave who didn't have any fire seed energy, but it was extremely difficult to control a warrior with awakened totemic powers. This was the power of the fire seed, and the conflict between fire seeds. The slave masters were all descendants of tribesmen with fire seeds. After a long time, they became slave masters. They also had fire seeds in their bodies. The war between fire seeds was just like the war between humans. It never subsided. Some of the slave masters who had wanted to attack the Wanxia tribe when they escaped the desert were now secretly glad that they didn't do anything. If the Wanxia tribe had been forced to use the power of the fire seed, they would have suffered the same fate as the Yanjiao warriors. Good thing we didn't do anything. Looks like the Yanjiao won't get away with it this time. I hope the Wanxia people can take this opportunity to destroy the Yanjiao tribe. Those who didn't think highly of the Wanxia tribe now changed their minds. A slave master on the side rolled his eyes and whispered, "Why don't we take this opportunity to help the Wanxia tribe?" The person who said this was the young master of Skywheel City, who didn't think highly of the Wanxia tribe before. Now that the situation had improved, he had another idea. "That makes sense. Let's go." There were others who had the same idea. They took the slaves in their hands and walked towards the battlefield. Xiao Xian was also trapped in the gray flames of the Wanxia tribe. He could clearly feel his power being suppressed, but compared to others, he was still much more flexible. Seeing more and more Yanjiao warriors being enveloped, Xiao Xian's heart skipped a beat. He shouted, "Gather together, everyone. Don't spread out too far. The more the better. The people are here, the fire seed is here. Don't be afraid." The Wanxia shaman said Yanjiao had no fire seed? How could there be no fire seed? The people were here, the fire seed was here, but it was no longer in its original form. Xiao Xian pulled the scattered Yanjiao warriors back to where the troops were gathered. He flicked away a blade and kicked the Wanxia man in the chest, kicking him away. Without stopping, he went straight to the troops gathered not far away. They were the first to follow him. Now they couldn't run out of the range of the Wanxia fire seed's flames. After hearing Xiao Xian's words, the Yanjiao warriors who had rushed out began to rush back in and gather together. Even if they ran out, they couldn't outrun the fire seed's speed. This was their first time facing such a powerful fire seed. They were inexperienced and panicked. Xiao Xian's words were like a beacon of light to them. Whether or not Xiao Xian's words were useful, their first reaction was to do as he said. After gathering, the Yanjiao warriors felt much more relaxed. The fading totemic patterns on their bodies showed up again. The fire seed's power seemed to have broken through the ice and started to recover. It worked. Yes, when they merged with the fire seed, the shaman also said that the fire seed was here as long as the people were here. At the time, they only thought it was a consolation of faith, but they didn't understand it fully. But now, they deeply understood the meaning of this sentence. The fire seed merged into their bodies and burned, never extinguished. One person's power was limited, and the fire seed was small. But when more people gathered, it was like sparks coming together to form a ball of fire. When the fire gathered together, it would become a raging inferno. Xiao Xian's words were spread. Duo Kong, Gigu, Ta and the others gathered the people around them. Ao and Zhang Luo, who rushed over later, also made arrangements for the people. The people were like disconnected dots that gradually connected. Because of the war, they didn't form a tight line or a tight circle, but they formed a battle line. As more and more people joined the battle line, under the mountainous pressure of the Wancher fire seed, this battle line was like a red hunting knife, cutting into the enemy. The pressure from the Wancher fire seed lessened. Even though the flames above them had accumulated to a terrifying height, the Yanjiao people had lost their fear of it. On the contrary, as the fire seed's power in their bodies became more active, their intention to fight back became more obvious. The shaman was right. In a war of this level, it was not easy to completely destroy the other side. If they really went on, it would be a battle between the fire seeds. So far, no tribe had brought their fire seed out to fight. This was one of the reasons why the Wancher tribe was so fearless. But now, Yanjiao's actions shocked the shaman. Why? Why was there Yanjiao's fire seed's aura here? Wasn't Yanjiao's fire seed gone? It wasn't there before. Bringing the fire seed out to fight? Were the Yanjiao people crazy? Where was it? Where was Yanjiao's fire seed? The Wancher shaman carefully sensed all the fire seed auras in his territory. However, he realized that the flaming horn fire seed's aura was everywhere in Wancher's territory. The aura wasn't strong, but they were all connected together. The twisting lines of fire seemed to want to split this newly built mountain apart. The aura of the two fire seeds was colliding. Whether it was the Yanjiao warriors or the Wancher warriors, or the nearby slave masters, they could all feel this change. The slave masters who had originally intended to help Wancher found that the situation had reversed once again. Their minds were uncertain, so they temporarily suspended their actions and stayed not far from the battlefield to watch. If Wancher continued to gain the upper hand, it would not be too late for them to make a move. Beside the fire pit, the shaman's eyes were full of disbelief. How could this be? What did the Yanjiao people do? Xiao Xian picked up an injured Yanjiao warrior who was about to die and carried him on his shoulder. The warrior's injuries weren't too serious, but he couldn't hold on under the pressure of the Wancher fire seed. He was too far away from everyone when they were fighting the Wancher people. When Xiao Xian told everyone to retreat, they didn't notice him and couldn't take him with them. Seeing that most of the Yanjiao people had gathered together, but Xiao Xian was the exception, the shaman came back to his senses. He glared at Xiao Xian fiercely, the gray totemic patterns making his twisted expression look even more ferocious. I don't care what you do. I'll bury you all here. You'll be crushed bones under the Wancher volcano. A beam of fire shot out from the fire pit, gathered in the air, and smashed down on Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian felt as if there was a powerful force above his head, as if the sky was collapsing. He didn't have time to think too much, so he threw the person on his shoulder towards the direction of the group. In the next moment, an enormous pressure came crashing down like an avalanche from a tall mountain. Xiao Xian felt his muscles and bones creak under the pressure, as if he was bearing the weight of a mountain. The gray flames grew thicker, blocking out most of the light. It was as if night had fallen. Chapter 5:15. Xiao Xian. Xian, how are you? Someone shouted anxiously from the group. However, because of the dense gray flames, their vision was blocked and they could not see clearly. Especially where Xiao Xian was, it was the spot where the shaman had exerted most of his strength. Xiao Xian knew that the attack had been aimed at him. Even through the gray flames, Xiao Xian could feel the Wancher shaman's venomous gaze on the other side of the flames. Xiao Xian was the leader of the first group to attack this place. How could the Wanshi shaman not hate him? Moreover, the Wanshi shaman had seen Xueqi before. In the desert, when he was still with the young master of Baishur city, he had seen Xueqi and Tuo. He had even helped to set up a trap to capture Tuo and Lei. However, things had developed beyond his expectations. From then on, Xueqi had been listed as one of the most important people to be wary of. Now that he saw Xueqi again, the Wanshi shaman was afraid. Since he couldn't kill those people in one go, he had to crush this extremely threatening brat first. Above them, the fireballs that had been piled up like a mountain continued to increase. In this place, the fireballs were increasing the fastest, not above the Yanjiao group, but above Xueqi's head. Earlier, Xueqi had been able to run and save a few injured people. However now, Xueqi felt as if there was a mountain on top of his head. He could not even turn around, let alone walk or run. Whoosh! 2 steps away, an arrow flew in. However, because of the fire seed's flames, or because the other party could not see the target's exact location, the arrow had missed. Someone wanted to use this opportunity to kill Xueqi. Under the fire seed's flames and within such a killing formation, it would take a lot of effort for someone outside to shoot accurately. Xueqi could feel the Wanshi people approaching. They probably felt that the Yanjiao group was not easy to deal with, so they changed their target. After all, there were too many Yanjiao people there. When they gathered together, the Yanjiao fire seed's power made the Wanshi people uncomfortable. The Wanshi people could not see Xueqi's situation clearly, but they could feel that there was someone not from the Wanshi tribe here. Who else could they attack but him? Realizing the situation, Xueqi knew he could not wait any longer. He moved his arms with all his might, trying to break free from this almost frozen feeling. Here, other than the immense pressure from above, Xueqi felt the same as when he first met the king's stoneworm. It was as if every part of his body was turning into stone, out of his control. If he could not break through this resistance, he would die. Xueqi could feel the Yanjiao group trying to get closer. If it was just one or a few people, they would not be able to save him because they could not withstand the Wanshi fire seed's power. But with so many people and the Wanshi people blocking them, they would move slower. Xueqi could not wait. Just as Xueqi expected, Tuo and the others also wanted to help Xueqi. However, as soon as they left the group, they would feel immense pressure. Forget about saving Xueqi, it would be difficult for them to get over safely. The closer they got to Xueqi, the greater the resistance. The Wanshi fire seed's power that the shaman added to Xueqi was stronger than anywhere else. If they wanted to get over, they could either move slowly or wait for others to arrive. With enough people, they could fight against the Wanshi fire seed. But time waits for no one. Xueqi breathed hard, every nerve in his body conveying a sense of urgency. He desperately wanted to break through this resistance. The totemic power in his body was pushed to the limit. His body creaked, like a rusty gear finally starting to turn. In his mind, the totemic flames burned fiercely. But this power was not enough. Far from enough. Outside the totemic flames, a faint white light shone. The light grew stronger quickly, even overshadowing the light of the totemic flames inside. Xueqi could not see through the egg-shaped light shield to see what the totemic flames inside looked like. If not for the red totemic power and blue power of inheritance extending from inside, Xueqi would have thought that the totemic flames were blocked off. Inside the egg-shaped light shield, threads of white light extended out along with the totemic power and the power of inheritance. They rushed to every part of his body like a torrent. As the energy surged into his body, his frozen and petrified blood seemed to be melting and boiling. His strength gradually recovered, and all the muscles in his body vibrated at a high frequency. His arm, which was holding the sword, was raised again with a creaking sound. Red flames shot out from Xueqi's body. This time, it did not come from the bone ornament he was wearing. The bone ornament seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep after the broken sea incident. Xueqi had not used the bone ornament's power for a long time. Now, the flames that shot out came from the surface of Xueqi's body. They had nothing to do with the bone ornament. And in more than one place, surrounded by the dark gray flames, they emitted a different light. More and more flames shot out. The flames grew bigger and bigger, enveloping Xueqi entirely. The pressure around him was as heavy as a rock. It came from above and around him. All the pressure was being pushed away. At first, it was just a small fluctuation. But soon, the fluctuation became bigger and the pushing force became stronger. The flames on Xiao Xian's body grew stronger. Faster. Just a little faster. As the flames rolled, Xiao Xian felt like every pore in his body was erupting with a heroic spirit. It wanted to push away all the obstacles around him. Break, break, break. Crack. A sound like the cracking of a rock suddenly rang out. Crack, crack, crack. The cracking sound grew louder and louder. It began to come from everywhere around him. The obstacles were gradually pushed away. The pressure in all directions was weakening. His body was becoming less tired. Cracks appeared on the ground under his feet. When the flames pressed down from above, there were no footprints on the ground. But now, as the pressure from above weakened, there was a dent in the ground. This was caused by Xiao Xian's explosive strength. His slowed heartbeat sped up. Xiao Xian took a deep breath, as if to expel all the pressure. Then he inhaled sharply and let out a long roar. Following the roar, the flames on Xiao Xian's body surged wildly. They pierced through the gray flames surrounding him like a fire dragon breaking free of its shackles. Without turning around, Xiao Xian swung his arm. The blade reflecting the flames swept out. The tip of the sword was 2 palms away from the 3 Wancher people. But the sword aura was as sharp as a blade, easily cutting their throats. After attacking Xiao Xian, the Wancher shaman had wanted to wait for Xiao Xian to be crushed to death by the Wancher fire seed's power. Then he would focus the fire seed's power on the others. But as he waited, he realized something was wrong. A drop of sweat dripped from his forehead. The shaman stared at Xiao Xian. At this time, Xiao Xian looked up. The shaman seemed to see through the layers of flames and saw Xiao Xian's shining eyes. "Stop him! Stop him!" The shaman's terrified voice was piercing and piercing. It spread everywhere. At this time, no one cared about the shaman's voice. They were confused. What had happened to make the shaman so terrified? Something happened to the fire pit. The scattered Wancher people gathered in the direction of the shaman's voice. Xiao Xian stepped forward. His step made a thud on the ground. It was comparable to the sound of the Wancher fire seed's fireball crashing down. After getting rid of his exhaustion, Xiao Xian felt as if his body was filled with endless energy. With every step he took, that energy doubled. His steps gradually sped up, but his footsteps became lighter and lighter. The sound of his footsteps weakened, and each step he left on the ground was shallower than the previous one. Until there were no footprints left, and only the soft rustling of the short grass on the ground could be heard. He swung his sword. It broke through the layers of gray flames and pierced the chest of a Wancher man who was about to shoot an arrow. Xiao Xian was still approaching Wancher's fire pit. Faster and faster. The Wancher people who rushed over could not stop him in time. When they got close, they could feel a strong repulsive force. It was like another tribe's fire seed was burning here. The Wancher shaman felt like he was facing a ferocious beast that had gone berserk with flames all over its body. Why was Xiao Xian able to break through the fire seed suppression? Why was Xiao Xian able to move freely under the fire seed suppression? The shaman did not want to think about it now. His mind was clouded by a possibility that he did not want to think about. This thought made him feel like he had fallen into an ice cave. At this moment, the Wancher shaman regretted not arranging more guards here. Then he realized with a start that he was doubting the fire seed of his tribe. Could the fire seed stop this person? This time, he lost his confidence. Even the guards could not stop Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian was too fast. The shaman's vision was not affected by the gray flames. At this moment, all the gray flames in his vision faded. Everything around him became clear. There seemed to be a voice in his head telling him what to do. The shaman watched as Xiao Xian approached. He thought Xiao Xian's target was him. However, just as he was about to die, he realized that Xiao Xian had jumped 10 steps away from him. He jumped over his head and charged towards the fire pit behind him. The shaman's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He could not believe that this person's target was the fire seed. He wanted to destroy the fire seed all by himself. Lunatic. This was a lunatic. If Yanjiao's fire seed was here, it might be possible. However, he was the only one here. Could he represent Yanjiao's fire seed? The shaman had never heard of anyone who could fight a large tribe's fire seed alone. Jumping in meant death. But soon, the shaman felt a pressure that made his heart stop beating. It pressed down from above and made him collapse on the ground. Xiao Xian jumped into the air and raised his hand to slap at the flames spewing out from the fire pit. His palm passed through the gray flames as if it was brushing against cold rocks. This palm seemed to be infinitely enlarged. It felt as if the palm could cover the entire fire pit. Under this palm it was like another world. There seemed to be electricity flashing under the palm. It was like a flash of light from the collision of clouds under the endless sky. Every time this palm pressed down, a portion of the gray flame mountain formed by the 10,000 stone stacks would crumble. The cracked gray flames exploded like rolling thunder. The air surged wildly like an avalanche sweeping down from the top of a mountain, setting off a deafening roar. The towering mountain that was unshakable like a giant trembled and collapsed. Everyone in the Wanshur tribe could feel this shocking change. At this moment, everyone who was fighting stopped what they were doing and tensed up to feel this change. In Xiao Xian's mind, the white light shield grew brighter. An unparalleled power was suddenly released. His palm pressed down again with the power to destroy the world. The battle of the tribes, the struggle for the fire seed, the battle of life and death. The others' despair, my glory. From now on, there would be no more Wanshur. Yanjiao would return to the peak. Destroy, for me. Rumble. The mountain collapsed as if the world was splitting apart. The deafening roar of splitting mountains and splitting rocks was deafening, and even the air seemed to be continuously exploding. The wind blew wildly as if to kill everything. The mountain that the Wanshur people thought was indestructible, the sturdiest and most reliable guard, the most powerful mountain of fire seeds, was heading towards its end, just like their crumbling faith. The sound shook the heavens and the earth. It was as if waves had been set off. Wave after wave, it spread far and wide. Even the people who had taken refuge in the forest could hear it clearly. In the lush forest, flocks of birds flew away in fright. Beasts roared and ran further away. When the roar finally subsided, the gray mountain of fire above the Wanshur tribe had disappeared. Like a thick fog being blown away, everything became clear. Yangguang at noon was dazzling. The warm light shone on the earth. However, in such a lively and noisy world, it seemed to be frozen. Everything was silent. Chapter 5:16. Everyone was dumbfounded by this sudden change. What had happened? Actually, everyone knew what had happened. They just didn't believe it. An injured Yanjiao warrior was holding a weapon. He had been planning to fight to the death with the Wanshur people, but now he felt that his opponent had disappeared. It wasn't that the person in front of him had disappeared. Instead, the person standing there was like a puppet that had lost its soul. His face was ashen, his eyes were empty, and his face was lifeless. He stood there like a stone, still maintaining the posture of listening. If it wasn't for the muscles on his face twitching rapidly, others might really think that this person had turned into a stone. This person was no longer a threat. The Yanjiao people didn't even want to attack. It was like encountering a fierce beast during a hunt. But as they fought, the fierce beast suddenly turned into a toothless little beast. They could kill it with a single stab. This feeling was too strange, so much so that for a moment, no one wanted to continue fighting. The pressure that had been pressing down on him all this while had disappeared along with the collapse of the formation. They could no longer feel the rejection from the fire seed. The flaming horn tribesmen could no longer feel any resistance from the fire seed. The torrent-like obstruction dissipated with the wind. All of this had happened too suddenly. Such a drastic change had sent them from heaven to hell in an instant. It was so fast that no one was prepared for it. What happened? Duo Kong swallowed and looked at the other Yanjiao warriors beside him. In his past life, he was used to living without a primitive fire seed. Hence, he wasn't as sensitive to it as the people of the old haunt. After sensing the changes around him, he had a guess. But he didn't dare to say it out loud. It was too hard to believe. I think Wanshur's fire seed is gone? Tao Zheng asked tentatively. He couldn't believe it either. Gone just like that? That was a primitive fire seed. It was known as the most powerful force in a tribe. A small tribe wasn't that powerful. But Wanshur was a large tribe. Their fire seed could suppress everyone so much. It was obvious how powerful it was. The power of fire seeds was also divided into strong and weak. In fact, after sensing the power of the myriad stone fire seed, the leaders decided to ignore the myriad stone fire seed for the time being and wipe out the myriad stone fire seed first. After that, they would mobilize the entire team to target the myriad stone fire seed. Otherwise, they would seek help from the shaman after this battle. They were all prepared to fight for a long time. Who would have thought that something like this would happen? Under the power of such a powerful Wanshi fire seed, there was actually someone who could destroy it? At this time, everyone was thinking, who destroyed it? On the side of the Wanshi tribe, they were all like walking corpses. This sudden huge blow completely destroyed their psychological defense line. They didn't want to believe the possibility in their hearts, but the totemic power in their bodies was disappearing. This change was very obvious. The disappearance of power was accompanied by endless exhaustion. The weapons in their hands became heavier and heavier, and their legs seemed to be tied to boulders. It was difficult to move. The soreness in his muscles and the pain from the wounds all over his body became clearer and clearer. The totem tattoos on his body were fading and disappearing. Like firewood that had burned to the end, the flames would die out and the wood would turn to ashes. Turning their necks mechanically, they looked in the direction of the fire pit. Without the gray flames blocking their vision under the clear sky, they could see clearly. Over at the fire pit, there was no fire seed flame. The power that had been protecting them had disappeared without a trace. They knew all too well what this meant. After all, they had wiped out other tribes and seen the fate of those tribes after their fire seeds were destroyed. Thinking of the tribes they had wiped out, the wanderers who lived miserable lives, and the slaves who were at the mercy of others. They had always understood the cruelty of this world. The strong preyed on the weak. But in the past, they had stood in the position of the butcher. Now, they were meat under the butcher's knife. They were like birds without an umbrella, about to be bombarded by the cruel storm outside. Yongguang was warm at noon. But under this sky, everyone in the Wanshi tribe felt an unprecedented chill. This was a psychological chill that chilled them to the bone. It was much colder than a bucket of ice water in the middle of winter. But there was nothing they could do. They could only shiver with the cold invading their bodies. By the fire pit, the Wanshi shaman's lips moved. He wanted to say something, but no sound came out. It was as if someone had grabbed his throat. He could not make a sound. How could this be? How could this be? The Wanshi shaman kept thinking about this sentence. A person was squatting in the fire pit of Wanshi. A Yanjiao. At this moment, the person's hand was pressed against the center where the fire seed usually burned. The Wanshi shaman stared fixedly at the hand that was stuck there. His gaze seemed to penetrate the hand and see if there would be more gray flames under the palm. Rumble. A small stone rolled, making a soft sound. The hand in the fire pit moved. Xueqi stood up slowly. He raised his hand and looked at the fire pit. This fire pit was dead. From now on, there would be no more fire seeds burning. A figure rushed over. Xueqi did not stop him. He watched as the Wanshi shaman ran over. He could not stand properly and fell to his knees. Then he dug with his hands like a madman, trying to dig something out of the ground. Stone after stone was dug out. Below was ordinary stone soil. That was all. Impossible. Impossible. The Wanshi shaman's hands were bleeding. He screamed hysterically. Then he looked at Xueqi. His eyes were filled with hatred and madness, but also some fear. Then he seemed to have made a decision. He pulled out a metal dagger and jumped up to stab at Xueqi. Xueqi just looked at him calmly, then stretched out 2 fingers and pinched the dagger that was coming towards him. It was a simple action, but it brought the Wanshi shaman back to reality. He had lost his strength. If he still had his strength, even if he was not a powerful warrior, he would not be so weak. His opponent could pinch him with 2 fingers. The Wanshi shaman did not let go of the dagger. He tried to push it forward, but the dagger did not budge. It was as if there was a solid wall in front of him. He could not move forward. Looking up at Xueqi's eyes, he realized that there was a strange light in Xueqi's eyes. Although the Wanshi fire seed was gone, the shaman still had some senses. He could feel that Xueqi's power was different from Wanshi's, Yanjiao's, or any other tribes. Was that really the fire seed's power? Thinking of Xueqi's hopeless jump and slap, the shaman kept replaying the scene in his mind. That was not the power of a normal tribesman. Definitely not. Who are you? The shaman muttered. Xueqi did not speak. Who are you? Who are you? Ignoring the shaman's screams, Xueqi flicked his fingers and pushed the dagger away. You're asking me? How would I know? Xueqi knew what the shaman was asking, but Xueqi could not answer. The shaman had said that to destroy the Wanshi fire seed, he had to follow the instructions of the fire seed in his body. He might also need to gather totemic power and inheritance power. However, at that moment, the power in his body was not Yanjiao's fire seed, but that strange power. Ever since he came to this world, Xiao had never figured out what that power was. Why was he brought here? But later, he learned that the power was related to the fire seed. It was not just Yanjiao's fire seed, but also the fire seeds of other tribes. Xiao looked the same as the other children in the tribe, but his awakening was different. Xiao once brought back the stone given by the crocodile of the drumming tribe, but it turned out to be a water moon stone. It was said that only the drumming tribe could produce this kind of stone. Xiao once went to the rain tribe. It was said that the ritual of praying for rain, which had not succeeded for thousands of years, succeeded. All of this was related to the power that brought him here. What kind of power was it? Xiao could not tell. Turning around, Xiao walked towards the direction of the tribe. There was no need to continue this battle. The Wanshe people gradually came to their senses. They had lost all their will to fight. When the Yanjiao team took a step forward, they retreated far away. Some people screamed in fear and ran away. This was like a signal. More and more people ran away from the opposing sides. Although the slave masters were shocked that Wanshe had been defeated much faster than they had expected, they were still satisfied with the current situation and the fate of the Wanshe tribesmen. They wanted to recruit the tribe warriors who had lost their fire seeds. Because they once had power, after losing it, they would definitely want to regain it. This was the best chance for the slave masters to intervene. Recruit. The slave masters who had shrunk away were like beasts that smelled meat. They all stretched out their claws. The flaming horns realized something was wrong. If the slave masters weren't here, they would be fine. After destroying the Wanshe fire seed, they had no interest in slaughtering the weak. However, with the slave masters here, it meant that the Wanshe people could regain their power and seek revenge. How could this be? Kill them. Kill them. Don't let them escape with the slave masters. Kill both the slave and the slave master. Zheng Luo shouted. Although the slave masters here were not strong enough, he still had to be careful. The 3 team leaders led some Yanjiao warriors to continue the chase. The 2 chiefs led the rest to clean up the battlefield, treat the injured, and count the dead. When Xiao returned, he saw Caesar lying on the ground, curled up and licking its wounds. During the attack, Caesar and the others were mainly blocking the Wanshe beasts. That was why they were not with Xiao. There were many bite wounds on its body from sharp teeth. It was covered in blood and there was a bloody hole on its back. It looked like someone had stabbed it with a spear. Hearing Xiao's footsteps, Caesar's ears twitched. It stopped licking its wounds and turned to look at Xiao. Xiao's footsteps froze. One of Caesar's eyes was gone. Chapter 5:17. Some warriors ran over to treat Caesar's wounds. They belonged to the logistics category. During the attack, they were at the back of the team, but now they were running around to apply medicine to the wounded. Caesar knew the warrior and knew that he was one of them, so he didn't reject him and let him apply medicine to his wounds. There were many corpses of Wanshe beasts on the ground, most of which were incomplete. The bite marks were very obvious, and some were even directly bitten off. The ground was covered with blood. The half-dried blood was sticky, and people walked on it, making a clattering sound. The pungent smell of blood was everywhere. Xiao's tension gradually subsided, but the feeling of exhaustion became more and more obvious. The strength in his body was almost drained. He walked to Caesar and raised his hand to wipe off the blood flowing from its eyes. There were also scratches around its eyes. After checking Caesar's wounds, Xiao patted it. "It's good that you're still alive." After that, Xiao ignored the sticky blood on the ground and sat down directly, looking around at the battlefield. The paramedics with medicine were rescuing the wounded. Those who were seriously injured could survive as long as they could hold on. The tribe's totem warriors were very resilient. No matter whether their bodies were damaged or not, at least they were still alive. Not far away, the forest Rakos was lying on the ground with its belly facing the sky. Its feet had been tied with layers of grass and animal skins. Its feet should be injured, but no one knew how serious it was. There were many bleeding wounds on its body, and a paramedic was applying medicine to it. Generally speaking, the other beast's injuries were different, but not much better than Caesar's. After all, facing the desperate attacks of the Wanshe beasts, even if they were ferocious beasts, they couldn't stay intact. However, These ferocious beasts' resilience was not worse than that of the tribe's warriors. Caesar's wounds were so serious that it would only take a few days to recover. But its eyes couldn't recover. He raised his hand and patted Caesar's blood-stained hair again. "You did well." Caesar gently nudged Xueqi with his nose and then continued to rest on the ground. While Xueqi was observing the battlefield, the person who was applying medicine to Caesar glanced at Xueqi from time to time, then applied medicine to Caesar and then looked at Xueqi. That warrior was curious. "I heard that Wancher's fire seed was extinguished by an elder. How did the elder die?" Unfortunately, at that time, because of the gray flames, they were far away from the fire pit and could not see the situation over there. They could only feel that the gray flames enveloping them were collapsing one after another. When it was almost dusk, the three leaders returned with their men. They chased them for a long time until they could no longer catch up with the slave masters. Only then did they return. In the Wancher tribe, other than the Yanjiao people, there were only some prisoners of war that the Wancher tribe had captured. There were no other Wancher people alive. Now that the Wancher tribe was destroyed, the prisoners of war could not find a place to go. Ao Feng and the others who wanted to leave could leave. Those who did not could stay and live here like the other wanderers around Yanjiao. Of course they had to work for it. But if they were found to have bad intentions, they could not blame the sword for being merciless. The children and women of the Wancher tribe had been sent away. This was done when they were preparing for war. When we chased them, we found an underground cave. The women and children of the Wancher tribe should have been there. But when we found it, there were no living people there. There were some old people's corpses in the cave. They were killed, but there were no women or children. Oh, there were also some slaves' corpses. The Wancher people should have been taken away by the slave masters, Gigu said to the two leaders. In a defeated tribe, the survivors would become prisoners of war. In the hands of the slave masters, they would definitely become slaves. Once they became slaves, it would be difficult to escape. The Wancher tribesmen without totemic power tried to escape from the flaming horns, but only a few succeeded. This was due to the difference in strength and speed. The slave masters could only snatch a few of them away. The smarter slave masters had already robbed the Wancher tribesmen of their treasures. The Wancher tribe was history now. The Wancher leader, Fu Wu, had committed suicide. After the fire seed was extinguished, he stabbed himself and died. The Wancher shaman fell in the fire pit. When Xueqi turned to leave, he spat out blood and died. Using the fire seed's power had used up too much of his energy. If the Wancher fire seed was still there, he might have had a chance to breathe. But now that it was extinguished, he was like a lamp without oil. There was no way to live. Ao and Zhang Luo quietly listened to the reports of the three team leaders who had just returned and thought to themselves. Today, the Wancher fire seed was extinguished. Those who were lucky enough to escape from the Yanjiao would become wanderers or slaves. If it was the Yanjiao, how could Yanjiao become like Wancher? Perhaps the disappearance of the primitive fire seed is a good thing. Ao sighed. This was the first time they had experienced a war like this. The first time they saw the destruction of a tribe's fire seed with their own eyes. The change in the primitive fire seed's form could prevent the fire seed from weakening. It could also prevent the possibility of being wiped out. The human race's situation was still developing in a good direction. Perhaps in the near future, all the tribes here would change. The primitive fire seed would become history, just like the other side of the sea. In the forest, the shaman and the others were still in a daze when they returned to the tribe. They still felt unreal. How long had it been? They were all prepared to sleep outside in the cave for a few days. But they had only gone yesterday and now they were back? Was it over? Not only the Yanjiao tribesmen, but the wanderers living in Yanjiao were also shocked. How could the arrogant Wancher tribe be gone? Many of them were still planning to run away if the situation went south, but they were told that the war was over. In a few days, they would be moving to Wancher's former territory to build houses and reclaim land. The Flaming Horns planned to plant crops there, mourning the dead, comforting the wounded, taking over Wancher's land, resettling the wanderers, planning the land outside the forest. Yanjiao was very busy. Yanjiao took over all of Wancher's belongings. After robbing for so many years, they had stockpiled a lot of things. But now, they were all Yanjiao's. Without the threat of Wancher, they would naturally expand their territory. Although the forest was big, it wasn't suitable for large-scale farming and breeding. There were too many beasts and they couldn't defend against all of them. Outside the forest, however, it was much more convenient. While Yanjiao was busy, the news of Wanchu's destruction spread to all the tribes. When the chief of the Mang tribe heard the news, his first reaction was disbelief. But he received news that the slave masters had been driven out of Wanchu's territory and went to other places. Some people went to Wanchu's territory and found that the people living there were all Yanjiao people. Everything he heard proved the credibility of the news. Really? Huang Yi still couldn't accept it. How long had it been? How long had it been since they came back from Yanjiao? Yanjiao said, "If you can do it, you can do it. If you can't, I'll do it." Did they really kill them? It was unbelievable. Losing the war was fine, but as long as their fire seed was not extinguished, they had a chance to turn things around. 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. As long as their fire seed was still there was hope. But there were many kinds of defeat. Wanchu was not only defeated, but their fire seed was also extinguished. It was the most complete kind of defeat. There was no chance for them to make a comeback. Thinking of this, the chief of the Mang tribe and the shaman both felt a chill in their hearts. Yanjiao really did it. How long did it take them to attack Wanchu? Why is there no news at all? Asked the chief of the Mang tribe. Since Yanjiao's fire seed became abnormal, they had sent people there. Once the war started, the people who were watching them would definitely send news. They should have a general understanding of the situation there. The person who reported the news said with a hoarse voice, Half a day, what?" Not only the chief of the Mang tribe, but also the others present jumped up from their chairs and bamboo mats. Half a day. The chief of the Mang tribe wanted to dig his ears again to prevent himself from hallucinating. Yes, that's what the people watching them said. The person who reported the news nodded heavily. In half a day, the Wanchu tribe that had been thriving for hundreds of years was gone. The chief of the Mang tribe was sweating. After thinking for a while, he said to Huang Yi, "Go to Yanjiao again and see if the news is true in Yanjiao." Huang Yi, who had just returned from Yanjiao, felt very conflicted. Should he go again? In addition to the Mang tribe, several other tribes, even those on the grassland, had received the news. Since Yanjiao's fire seed became abnormal, it attracted the attention of many people. Naturally, the news of Wanchu's destruction was also known through some channels. Therefore, when Huang Yi packed his things and went to the Yanjiao tribe again, he met Gu Ji and Qiu, who were also conflicted. Thinking of the last time they brought people to the Yanjiao tribe, the three of them could only sigh. They were conflicted. Chapter 5:18. After the war ended unexpectedly, the Yanjiao tribe was busy every day. The fearsome beast forest was in the direction of the Wanchu tribe. People came and went every day, and the sound of trees being chopped or hammered could often be heard. Because the Yanjiao tribe wanted to take over the Wanchu tribe's territory, they planned to open up a path to transport supplies from the tribe in the forest to the Wanchu tribe. In the past, it wasn't difficult to walk in the forest, but it was more troublesome to open up a path. The dangerous plants and beasts in the forest were exterminated, and the trees were cut down according to the planned route. The cut-down trees were transported to the side to build houses for the people. The uneven places on the ground had to be smoothed out, otherwise, it would not be good to pull the cart in the future. Therefore, when people walked past here, they often saw bare-chested Yanjiao warriors hammering the ground with large stone hammers. The ground shook with the thuds. Hurry up and pull it out, or I won't be able to hammer it." A warrior with a large stone hammer yelled at his companion, wiping his sweat. In the place he pointed, there were trees that had been chopped down. The roots were still there. If they wanted to make the ground firm, they couldn't leave the wood behind. "Wait, there's a big rock underground. I'll dig it out first, then you hammer it." Seeing this, the warrior who was hammering the ground put the stone hammer aside and sat on the grass to rest. He looked back at the result of his hard work over the past few days. A smooth dirt road stretched from the tribe's position to here. There was no longer the dangerous atmosphere of the forest. He couldn't help but feel proud. Thinking of something, he couldn't help but ask his companions, "Hey, I heard that the chief wants to trade for some cart-pulling beasts from the Lu tribe. Do you think horses or cows are better?" "Horses. Horses can pull carts, ride them, and run fast. Cows. What's so good about horses? Cows can pull carts and run fast, and I heard they can pull plows too. And cows have horns. They look more powerful. Cows and horses are the same, but the Lu tribe's bird eggs are better, a warrior said. TSK, the eggs of the Lu tribe are bigger than the eggs of the other tribes. Let me tell you, when we were on the other side of the sea, our tribe raised ducks. They were brought back by Great Elder Xian. They also had duck eggs, which could detoxify poison. It's a pity that the duck didn't come with us. Speaking of the Great Elder, he came out of the same cave as me. Ku recalled a long time ago, before they came to the old haunt and awakened their totemic power, they lived in a cave at the foot of the mountain. Hearing Ku's words, the others stopped bragging and gathered around to look around. Seeing that no one else was near, they lowered their voices and asked Ku, "Hey brother, tell us about the Great Elder back then. Was he very powerful?" Back then. Ku recalled the thin and small figure in his memory. No one would believe that the person back then had grown to such an extent. At this moment, the first elder that these people were talking about was frowning and biting the end of his pen.
"How do I write it? How do you want me to write it?" Xian looked at the empty animal skin scroll.
He had bites on the wooden handle of the brush, leaving bite marks on it. Xian didn't have this habit before, but these days he was forced to bite the pen because of the task assigned by the shaman. In half a day, the shaman destroyed the fire seed of the Wanshi tribe. This surprised and delighted the shaman. As the first large-scale victory in 1,000 years, it must be recorded and passed down to future generations. This was a shining point in Yanjiao's history. It couldn't be missed. And to record this significant historical event, how to extinguish the fire seed was a very important part. The shaman couldn't write this part, so Xian had to write it himself. But here came the problem. Xian couldn't write it. How to extinguish the fire seed was almost an instinctive reaction, like a dream. After the fire was extinguished, he recovered and rested, but the process of extinguishing the fire was a little vague. Now, no matter how hard Xian tried to recall, it was difficult for him to remember the key parts. First of all. Second, what Xian wrote down was to be passed down to future generations of Yanjiao, so he had to be careful. Words and sentences had to be carefully chosen. Otherwise, the future generations of Yanjiao would be affected. As the Great Elder, he had to have the momentum and dignity of the Great Elder. According to the habits of the ancestors, the animal skin scrolls that recorded important events were all written concisely and clearly, with the key points highlighted. They also had special idiomatic sentences. In their eyes, this was the most solemn way of writing, so Xian had to learn from them. However, Xian's habit of using words was obviously different from others. With a long sigh, Xian looked sideways at Guizhe on the other side of the table. As the successor of the shaman, Guizhe was also given a task and had to write a lot of things. Looking at the 3 animal skin scrolls next to him, Xian didn't even need a draft. Noticing Xian's gaze, Guizhe raised his head and looked at Xian in confusion. "Cough, Guizhe, lend me your animal skin scrolls to copy, for reference," Xian said. Guizhe didn't expect Xian to ask this question. Generally speaking, whether it was the shaman or the successor of the shaman, the animal skin scrolls they wrote couldn't be casually shown to others, because most of what they wrote contained some of the tribe's secrets. Even most of the people in the tribe didn't know about it. However, Xian, as the great elder of the tribe, was qualified to look at the animal skin scrolls. Moreover, it seemed that there was nothing he didn't know about what was written. Guizhe hesitated for a moment, then handed the 3 animal skin scrolls next to him to Xian. She didn't understand. It was just an animal skin scroll. Why did he have to be so hesitant? Xian used Guizhe's words as a reference and made a draft. He couldn't remember the specific situation when the fire seed was extinguished, so he could only leave the words "follow instinct" and "follow the instructions of the fire seed." This was the universal sentence on the animal skin scroll, so it couldn't be wrong. As for the specifics, he could only add them when he remembered. Coming out of the shaman's house, Xian looked at the sun in the sky. It should be sunny these days, which would be very convenient for the tribe to carry out their plans. In 2 days, the road from the tribe to the forest should be ready. When he returned home, Caesar was lying outside, grinding his teeth on a piece of animal bone. In the battle with the Wanshi tribe, Caesar lost an eye, but it had a strong recovery ability. As a branded ferocious beast, it also had the power of the Yanjiao's totem, but it couldn't merge with the fire seed. With the power of the totem, it could naturally recover faster. In the Battle of Wanshi, it killed the most Wanshi beasts in the tribe. Caesar was more seriously injured than the others, but in terms of recovery ability, it was better than the others. When Caesar was able to hunt in the forest, the two beasts in the Yongguang's house were still resting. The forest Rakos was still lying on its back because of its foot injury. When they came back from the Wanshi tribe, it was Guang who carried it back. According to the tribe's secret engraving technique, the descendants of the ferocious beasts in the tribe would become ordinary beasts again. The influence of the engraving technique would only exist in their generation. In the future, the tribe would choose the best ones from their descendants to engrave. Because of Caesar's eye injury, Xueqi made an eye patch with animal skin to prevent the wound from rubbing dust and stones or getting infected by branches in the forest. At first, Caesar wasn't used to it and always wanted to scratch it with its claws. Now it was much better. Sometimes when it went out to hunt, it would rub off the eye patch. Old Ku would replace it with a spare one and make a few more. The wound was almost healed, but Caesar's right eye was gone and couldn't recover. In the future, Caesar could only see with one eye, which might affect its hunting. Recently, it spent more time hunting, so it was getting used to it. Old friend, it's okay if you can't catch any prey. I'll take care of you. Xueqi checked Caesar's recovery and made sure there was no more infection. Then he entered the house. Xian, the people of the Lu tribe came to see you, said Old Ku, who was working on a stone tool. The Lu tribe? Yanjiao? Yes, that's him. When they heard the news of Wanshi's destruction, the people of the Lu tribe all cheered. That scourge was finally gone. Now, the people of the Lu tribe came to Yanjiao eagerly. The Wanshi tribe was leveled. Houses, animal pens and fields were rebuilt on the ground. The people of the Lu tribe also gave free guidance to the people who built the animal pens. They taught them how to make the construction more convenient and the animals they raised would be better. Xueqi guessed that Yanjiao wanted to discuss with him about raising young beasts. Now that the tribe's territory had expanded, new animal pens were built one by one. Naturally, there was more demand. A few days ago, when the people of the Lu tribe came, they mentioned that Yanjiao was very willing to make a deal with Yanjiao. Destroying the Wanshi tribe in half a day was indeed a shocking thing. The name of the Flaming Horn tribe had also spread out. The major tribes in the central region would definitely be more vigilant now. However, they didn't dare to offend the Flaming Horn tribe. Otherwise, they wouldn't have tolerated the Wanshi tribe for hundreds of years without fighting. If they thought too much, they would think too much and worry too much, which would only make them hesitant. He just didn't know how many tribes would send people over this time. Xueqi looked around but didn't see Yanjiao. He heard that Yanjiao went outside the forest to guide the construction of animal pens. He would probably come back later. Xueqi wasn't in a hurry. He turned around and went to the wanderers' area. The wanderers had been living on the edge of the forest for 2 years. After all, they weren't Yanjiao people and didn't have much power. They were still afraid of this forest. Even if there were Yanjiao warriors patrolling, compared to the outside of the forest, they preferred the latter. So this time, when Yanjiao was expanding their territory, they were anxious to move there. When he arrived at the wanderers' area, the people here were also busy. Some wanderers went out to build houses. They still had to build their own houses, but they had to follow Yanjiao's rules and couldn't build randomly. Most of the people who were still here were injured or young children. There were children running outside. Only in Yanjiao's wanderers' area could they have such a chance. If they were in the wanderers' area near other tribes, the young children wouldn't even dare to go out of their houses. Knowing that the wanderers' area was busy these days, the chief also sent people to keep an eye on them to prevent trouble. When Xueqi arrived, a group of Yanjiao warriors were talking and laughing together. Chapter 519. As soon as they saw Xueqi, the group of people who were chatting and laughing immediately stood up straight. Although Xueqi was about the same age as them, and even younger than many of them, everyone in the Yanjiao tribe was in awe of this great elder. Especially after the Battle of Wanshi, Xueqi's status was almost higher than the two chiefs. The group of people who were guarding here was to prevent the wanderers from causing trouble. If they found any trouble, they would stop them. If not, they would just chat on the side. They didn't expect to meet Xueqi here. At this time, the mood of this group of people was like a student who was absent-minded in class and suddenly found the principal standing behind him. Maybe the people who were guarding here weren't asked to do anything, but they were really relaxed at this moment. So when they saw Xiao Xian, they looked away guiltily, and then quickly glanced at Xiao Xian from time to see if the great elder was angry. Originally, Xiao Xian planned to pass by here to check on the farmlands and animal pens in the tribe. But when he passed by, he stopped and walked towards the wanderers' area. Here he comes. Here he comes. The warriors who were guarding here felt nervous and looked down. When they looked up, they quickly looked at each other. The great elder's expression didn't look good. What should they do? Would they be scolded? Hearing Xiao Xian's footsteps approaching, their hearts beat fast. When Xiao Xian finally stopped in front of them, they had to look up and smile. Great elder. You've been guarding here all this time? Xiao Xian asked. Yes, we've been here all this time. We've been guarding here since dawn this morning. Nothing happened in the wanderers' area, the leader replied. What about before? Was it also you? Xiao Xian asked again. Yes, we and another group took turns guarding here. But we weren't here at night. There were other patrols. The leader said. He was secretly anxious. Did the great elder find something wrong? However, they had been guarding this place the entire time and hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. Xiao Xian didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he walked towards a house not far away. The team members who stayed behind looked at each other. Then, the leader made the decision to follow Xiao Xian. If Xiao Xian noticed anything unusual, they could make up for it. Xiao Xian walked towards a very ordinary wooden house. Looking at its appearance and materials, it was indeed a very ordinary house in the wanderers' area. However, this house was quite far away from the other houses. In this area, there was only this house, as if it was isolated. There was a layer of dust on the stone at the entrance, and where the stone was sunken, the dirt had formed a clump on the stone. It was obvious that no one had sat on it for a long time. This house was the place where Xiao Xian had found the longevity leaf that recorded the knot divination technique. Since then, no one had come to this house. When the outsiders were discovered, the wanderers were told that there were defectors. The other people who lived in the wanderers' area were anxious to separate from this house. They were afraid of being misunderstood. They were afraid of being suspected of being involved with the defectors and being driven out. Because Xiao Xian had told the patrols to pay attention to the surroundings, there were often some patrolling soldiers walking around. Now, the wanderers who lived in the surrounding area had moved away, as if they were avoiding the plague. Therefore, this isolated situation appeared. Xiao Xian didn't go in immediately. He walked around the outside of the house, and then stopped at the window. There were some subtle scratches on the window frame. If one didn't pay attention, it would be difficult to notice. The scratches looked relatively fresh, and it didn't look like they had been there for a year or two. Although there was a layer of dust on the window frame, if one looked carefully, they would find that the dust there was thinner than other places, as if someone had gently blown it. Has anyone gone in here recently? Xiao Xian asked. No, at least when we were here, we didn't see anyone go in. The leader hurriedly said. Because they knew that this place was the focus of attention, if they were guarding here, they would definitely pay more attention. They wouldn't go in easily, and they wouldn't make this kind of mistake. Why don't I ask the people from the other team? The leader asked. Not now. Xiao Xian opened the door and walked into the house, but the following team didn't dare to go in easily. They knew that something must have happened in this house, and they wouldn't step in without permission. The situation in the house was similar to Xiao Xian's impression. The wooden table that was broken by Gigu in anger had already been cleaned up. The wooden house of about 20 square meters was empty. However, at the place where Xiao Xian dug out the longevity leaf, there were traces that the soil had been moved. Although the other party was very careful, it was still moved. There was a difference in the color of the soil. If it had been a while, it might not be obvious, but now, the traces were still relatively fresh. Someone should have been here within the past 3 days. Someone has been here, Xiao Xian said as he suddenly looked in a direction, and quickly walked out of the house. Seeing Xiao Xian's expression, the team guarding the wanderer area knew that things had changed. They were about to follow, but Xiao Xian stopped again. They ran fast. Xiao Xian stared in a direction. He had just sensed an aura that didn't belong to the Yanjiao tribesmen. Since the Battle of Wanshi, his perception of the fire seed had become sharper. In addition, the other party should have been moving. If that person had been approaching here, Xiao Xian would have sensed it. However, the other party was too cautious. He seemed to have noticed Xiao Xian's gaze and decisively left quickly. Hearing Xiao Xian's words, the faces of the guards changed. Grand Elder, you mean there's an outsider? This outsider was naturally not a wanderer, but someone from another tribe who had snuck in. Yes. You guys should pay more attention these few days. Try to use the power of the fire seed to sense the intruder. Xiao Xian said. The fire seed had already merged with everyone's body. If they used the power of the fire seed to sense the intruder, even if they couldn't immediately detect it, they would at least be able to sense it when the intruder was right in front of them. The benefit of merging with the fire seed was that the fire seed's sensing ability was strengthened. If the Yanjiao tribesmen only had a vague sense of their tribe's bloodline in the past, now it was very clear. This was also the difference between the Yanjiao tribesmen and the other tribes. Outsiders didn't know this. Yes, the guards hurriedly promised. They didn't doubt Xiao Xian's words. If the Grand Elder said it was true, then it must be true. An outsider sneaking in was no joke. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. At the same time, they were annoyed that an outsider had appeared in the area they were guarding. Although it wasn't considered a dereliction of duty, they didn't realize that this threat was real. Xiao Xian asked them to inform the other patrolling guards to tighten the security. Then, he walked around the wanderer area and didn't find anything, so he went to the tribe's fields. Not long after, Duo Kong and the other two team leaders came looking for him. When the patrolling guards in the tribe were informed that an outsider had sneaked in, they naturally knew about it. Who could it be? The few large tribes that haven't made any moves? Duo Kong asked. No, Gigu's face darkened. It could also be a bandit. He had already heard from the others that Xiao Xian had gone to that house. He knew what Xiao Xian was suspecting. What made him angry was that they still hadn't caught the intruder. Now, the intruder might have appeared again. I don't know if the intruder this time is from the same group as the two from before. Although the two of them had snuck in, they didn't have any killing intent. But if it was someone else this time, I can't be sure what they would do. Xiao Xian was also on guard. Also, the intruder is very cautious and escapes quickly. It'll be hard to catch him. No matter what, strengthen the patrolling guards. To guard against a bandit, we can't just look at their appearance. They have too many tricks up their sleeves. We might not be able to recognize them just by looking at their appearance. We can only identify them from their roots. Strengthen the patrolling in the Wanderer district. Xiao Xian voiced his guess. They can't be hiding in the houses of other warriors in the tribe. Otherwise, they would have been discovered long ago. They can only be hiding in the Wanderer district or outside the tribe. The three team leaders nodded. Identification at the level of the fire seed was the most accurate. The infiltration of an outsider made the Yanjiao warriors, who had become complacent after destroying the Wanxia tribe, finally calm down. It was just the Wanxia tribe. In this world, there were many people stronger and more difficult to deal with than the Wanxia tribe. The bandits were one of them. As an alternative group, the robbers were indeed mysterious and gave people headaches. Even the Mang tribe and the Eight Limbs tribe had been infiltrated by the robbers, and more than once. Until now, they had not been caught. One could imagine how cunning they were. Moreover, Xiao Xian wanted to find the person who had snuck into Yanjiao and hid the longevity leaf in the house. He wanted to ask them where they found the longevity leaf. The knot divination recorded on the longevity leaf was passed down from the Yi tribe. Xiao Xian had confirmed this on the other side of the sea. It was also certain that the Yi tribe had brought the longevity leaf here 1,000 years ago. Then, from whom did the bandits steal the longevity leaf? Chapter 520. Because of the infiltrators, Yanjiao became nervous again. They were not as excited as they were after the Battle of Wanxia. They were famous for destroying Wanxia, but they also attracted a lot of attention. They could not afford to let their guard down. The road is done. Someone pulled the cart over today. It looks good. We've built 10 animal pens outside. Do we need to build more? The fields have been demarcated. We'll distribute some to the wanderers according to the original plan. The rest is ours. In one of the stone houses in the Flaming Horn tribe, the 2 shamans, 2 chiefs, 3 team leaders and many other team leaders were gathered for a discussion. They were discussing their recent progress. Of course, Grand Elder Xiao Xian could not be absent. As they talked, Ao noticed that Xiao Xian was distracted. He coughed, "Xian, What do you think of what we talked about just now? Let's continue with the original plan. Although we can't plant much this year, we still need to do some work to make the land fatter. I've already told them what to do. I'll go check it out in 2 days. There's no need to expand the animal pens. Let's wait for the Lu tribe to send their cubs over. We'll take it one step at a time. If we raise too many suddenly, we might not be able to handle it, Xiaoxian said. Xiaoxian seemed to be distracted. He didn't expect him to listen to so much. Ao nodded. Then we'll do as you say. As for the metal wares, I've discussed it with Zhang Luo. When all the wanderers move away, we'll build a bigger casting room. Xiaoxian had no objections. After knowing the secret of the core seed, the tribesmen were very concerned about smelting and casting. Maybe it was because they heard about the slave masters on the other side of the sea, or maybe it was because they saw the potential of metal wares. They spent a lot of effort on this. By the way, during this time, other than the Lu tribe, did any other tribes come? Xiaoxian asked. Never heard of them. I don't think so. No. The others replied. But there are suspicious people walking around. Maybe they're from the big tribes in the central region. Duo Kong saw it when he went outside to supervise the work today. But the other party was far away. When he moved, the other party ran away. What, are you waiting for them to come? Asked Zhang Luo. Xiaoxian shook his head. I just think that at this time they should have come here to investigate. However, since they haven't appeared yet, perhaps they have other plans, or perhaps they are waiting. Wait for what? Ao asked. Maybe he wants to wait for more people to come together, Xiaoxian speculated. The people in the room looked at each other and smiled. Being able to make those tribes fear them proved that Yanjiao's position in those people's hearts had indeed risen. This made them very proud, but when they thought of the possible predicament they might face, they immediately calmed down. In any case, no matter how big the challenge was, they would face it head-on. If the people from the Hui tribe come, let me know. Xiaoxian said. Okay, if I see anyone from the Hui tribe, I'll send someone to find you. Ao knew why Xiaoxian called the people from the Hui tribe back, so he immediately agreed. 2 days later, as Xiaoxian had guessed, people from several tribes came together. The leaders of the Mang tribe, 8 Limbs tribe, and Feather tribe were the same 3 people as last time. However, this time, the 1,000 Masks tribe, Tian Shan tribe, and Longboat tribe were with them. The Hui tribe did not come with them. They arrived one step behind, but not far from each other. In a place like this where information did not travel quickly, they must have some special means of communication to be able to gather together. When the 7 tribes arrived, Xiaoxian was in the forging room with a few blacksmiths, thinking about how to improve the bronze wares. Although they knew some theoretical methods, there were always some mistakes in the implementation. There were not many weapons that were up to standard, let alone good or even high-quality ones. They did not even see a shadow of those. They're already here? Xiaoxian put down the bronze axe in his hand and went out with the warrior who came to inform him. Yes, the shaman and the chief are with them now, but the shaman said you're busy, so you don't have to go if you don't want to. The warrior who brought the message briefly explained to Xiaoxian. How many people from the Hui tribe came? How did they come? Xiaoxian asked. The warrior thought for a moment and said, about 10. They should have flown here on eagles. I saw 3 giant eagles. They were big enough. One of them was even bigger than a cha-cha. Who's the leader? A man called He-Shi. He-Shi, Xiaoxian remembered. When they went to the desert, He-Shi was with the Hui tribe. As an elder, He-Shi helped Xiaoxian several times during the desert trip. It was better than the other tribes who ignored him. After getting a general idea, Xiaoxian knew what was going on. The other tribes felt that they did not have a good relationship with Yanjiao before. This time they came together with confidence. However, this time, they seemed to have lowered their stance. It might not be because of Yanjiao's destruction of Wanshi. Perhaps, their ultimate goal was still the fire seed. This was the key reason why they were forced to lower their stance. In comparison, the relationship between the Hui tribe and Yanjiao was not so bad, so they did not feel much psychological pressure. Xiaoxian waited for the other side to finish talking before he went over. The people from the 7 tribes were arranged to stay in some newly built houses outside the forest. They were not allowed to get close to the other tribes in the forest. Xiaoxian asked someone to take him to the resting place of the Hui tribe. When he arrived, he saw a giant eagle pecking its feathers outside the house. Looking at its size, it was indeed bigger than Cha-Cha. However, Xiao Xian felt that this eagle was somewhat familiar. When Xiao Xian looked over, the eagle also sensed it. It turned its head to look at Xiao Xian. Obviously, it still remembered Xiao Xian. Its first reaction was to bristle. Its neck became thicker because of the bristling feathers. It even screamed at Xiao Xian. "Oh, it's you, loser," Xiao Xian said lightly. This sentence made the eagle even angrier. Its eyes flashed sharply. Standing on the ground, its claws scratched the hard ground like it was tofu, leaving a few deep marks. "What's the rush? The truth is the truth, right? Shan Dao?" Xiao Xian continued. This eagle was the one he had met when he went to the grassland to pick up wanderers. He had fought with the traveling team of the Dishan tribe at a trading rest place. At that time, this eagle had been badly beaten by Cha-Cha. Therefore, Xiao Xian was right to call it a loser. At that time, this eagle was not so big. It was about the same size as Cha-Cha. Now it had changed so much. This was not the result of natural growth. It must have gone to the Eagle Mountain, so it changed. The people of the Hui tribe in the house heard the cry and quickly came out. Some of them knew Xiao Xian, such as the one who fed Shan Dao. "It's Xiao Xian, the great elder," Gula said with a smile. Today, he asked the other Yanjiao people about Xiao Xian. Only then did he know that Xiao Xian had become the great elder of the whole Yanjiao tribe. Moreover, judging from the expressions of the Yanjiao warriors when they talked about Xiao Xian, it was definitely not because of connections. "Oh, it's Gulab." Xiao Xian also recognized the leader of the Hui tribe's trading team. "Great Elder Xiao Xian, what brings you here at this time?" Gula was very happy to see Xiao Xian. It was rare to see someone he knew, so he wanted to talk with him. He also wanted to know more, but he began to feel uneasy when he thought of something. "I heard that Cha-Cha went to the Hui tribe 2 years ago and left with several eagles of your tribe. Is that true?" Xiao Xian asked directly. "It really came." Gule's eyes flashed with worry. He nodded and said, "Yes, they went to Eagle Mountain together. Some of the giant mountain eagles living in our tribe's territory are about to go to Eagle Mountain, but..." Seeing Xiao Xian staring at him and waiting for him to continue, Gula paused and continued. "The one from your tribe went in and didn't come out." "It went into Eagle Mountain and didn't come out?" Xiao Xian asked. Gula nodded. "That's what Shan Dao and the others told us. According to the rules of the giant mountain eagles, only those who came out after entering Eagle Mountain would be considered successful. If they failed, they would die." Xiao Xian had heard this before. Everyone in the Hui tribe knew this, so they didn't dare to say it out loud. Other than Cha-Cha, the rest of the eagles that went to Eagle Mountain returned. How could the Yanjiao people not have any ideas? Xiao Xian was silent for a while. He asked Shan Dao a few questions and asked Gula to translate. He could understand Cha-Cha's actions and cries, but he didn't know what the eagle was trying to say. Xiao Xian wanted to ask about the details of their trip to Eagle Mountain, but this seemed to touch on the eagle's secret. Shan Dao avoided talking about it, and even Gula didn't know. So, as long as it was about how to get to Eagle Mountain, or what happened on the way, the eagle wouldn't tell them. Since he couldn't get an answer, Xiao Xian could only change the question. "When Cha-Cha arrived at Eagle Mountain, how was he?" Xiao Xian asked. "Very good," Gula replied. "So good that he could throw stones at other eagles." "Was he injured?" "Injured, but not seriously. The others were all injured." "Did he rush into Eagle Mountain by himself?" "Yes." After asking some questions, Xiao Xian didn't understand. How long had it been since the last time he went to Eagle Mountain? Why would he go there again? Some adult eagles might not go there again for 20 or 30 years. Even if he went there frequently, it might not be effective. Plus, he would have to take greater risks. What was Cha-Cha trying to do? Did he want to kill himself in Eagle Mountain? That couldn't be. That guy wasn't a suicidal eagle. Xiao Xian couldn't figure out why Cha-Cha would go to Eagle Mountain. He couldn't go there directly to find him. He only knew the road that led to Eagle Mountain. After coming here, he didn't know which other road led to Eagle Mountain. After thanking Gula, Xiao Xian didn't stay any longer. He thought about it as he walked towards the newly cultivated fields. As he walked, Xiao Xian stopped in his tracks. He felt two familiar auras. They were not from the Flaming Horns, nor were they from any of the tribes that came here. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.